Welcome to Mythic Audiobooks. The next parts of this audiobook will be added to the playlist soon, so be sure to check the description. If you'd like to enjoy an uninterrupted experience and support the channel, consider joining my Patreon. Your support helps keep these audiobooks coming. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the story.
Chapter 1. Loser. You are a loser. In the small house, the music is so moving, clear and dynamic in such a small space. The tape is rolling, male voice, female voice, harmony, the humorous tune is a bit addictive. Laugh. The kettle on the induction cooker was emitting white steam and the lid was making popping sounds. The old house has little space. It looked very messy, with newspapers and garbage piled up on the table, as well as some snack bags. And the flour in lumps. It's worth a lot of money. Bang. A gunshot rang out, the kettle exploded. The hissing sound stopped abruptly, and the water spilled onto the circuit board, sending out sparks with crackling sounds. AMR. Deadpool turned over and changed into a comfortable position, with a pile of gasoline barrels under him. Hiss. I put the smoking muzzle of the gun to my nostrils and took a deep breath of the smoke. The stimulating feeling went straight to my forehead and it felt like my anus was unblocked. Loser. It's going to be okay. Loser Wildy. Following the touching music, the whole house unfolds. The small house was covered in blood and dead bodies were lying all over the floor. Almost all of them were shot in the head, with cracked skulls, and even white spots could be seen. It can be seen that the shooting is very accurate. In the sense of nonsense, pa. The flame of the lighter flickered, Deadpool lit a cigarette, pulled off his mask, revealing his disfigured face, and took a deep puff. Ha! Exhaling a puff of smoke, it was so refreshing that it felt like flying. Loud music. He seemed to be much calmer. Holding the cigarette, he flicked the ash with his right hand. He put his hands behind his head and looked up at the empty space in front of him. He was a little confused. What on earth is this light screen? Will it affect today's suicidal behavior? This was originally a gangster transaction site. Looking at the layout of the site, if you get the hang of it, I'm afraid today's suicide will keep him quiet for a whole day. No, half a day is enough, but just after he killed everyone, there was a sudden chew in front of his eyes, and a light screen appeared like this. As long as he wants, this thing seems to be able to move. Ha ha ha, someone should cancel this ability. I don't want to put the hum in my left hand into your mouth and make you unable to speak. 20 seconds later, no one responded. Okay, you win. Deadpool flicked the cigarette butt in his hand, and it drew a beautiful arc in the air, very perfect. It fell into the opened gasoline barrel. Boom! A famous scene was created, with broken limbs and bodies in black and red combat uniforms flying in the air. This scene immediately became a classic. Deadpool made a heart shape with his hands and showed a peaceful smile on his face. At least at this moment, he is free. Everything that happened in the cabin came from a free town in the United States. Although the explosion was magnificent, no one appreciated it. Because the whole town, already full of people. Drunkards, politicians, little girls in miniskirts and black stockings on the street, and even a simple dressed farm girl. Now, everyone looked up at the sky above the town. A huge amount of light screen. Over New York. In the thick clouds. The aerospace aircraft carrier hovered in the clouds, with the invisible coating on its surface turned on, completely hiding its body, leaving only a huge monster, hidden secretly. After the New York incident, everyone has come to realize that S.H.I.E.L.D must be a hole. This aerospace aircraft carrier is S.H.I.E.L.D's mobile office. This should have been the safest and easiest place for mixing, but now it has become a mess. Da-da-da. Agent Hill, wearing leather shoes, looked through the report in the file without raising his head. Taking steps, stepping on the deck, moving forward step by step. When I passed by, someone was still handing me documents. Inside the entire S.H.I.E.L.D aerospace carrier, everywhere you look, there are busy sounds. In the aerospace carrier, where the captain is in command, Nick Fury with a salted egg head is as black as a coal ball. This is the most serious invasion in history. Sir Carlson, the deputy beside him, looked solemn at the moment. I also have a report in my hand. The report shows all the areas where the attacks occurred, and even huge light screens appeared in special places. In 10 minutes. The network is completely blown up. No one knows what's going on. Da-da-da. Agent Hill came over, finally arranged the report in his hand into a document, slid the left arm display, and pulled the document. Transmitted to the largest observation position on the mothership. She looked at Nick Fury, but fortunately it wasn't a large-scale invasion. The light screen seemed to appear suddenly, as if the aliens were going to show us something. With her blonde hair, S.H.I.E.L.D is a perfect representative female character of the United States. Her profile in the sun looks very beautiful. Nick Fury didn't look at it at all, his attention was focused on the light screen, and the elevator under his feet fell down. He took his turn inside the second deck. In a distant research room, Iron Man Tony Stark, with a kind of blue light emitting from both sides of his cheeks. The light is flashing, as if it is communicating. Still no clue. He stretched out his hand, gathered a blue light spot in front of his eyes, squeezed it into a ball, and threw it into the empty space next to him. Trash bins automatically recycle. No, sir. The 5 billion broadcast sources detected worldwide cannot break through the information barrier and cannot trace the information projection point. Jarvis' respectful voice sounded. In front of Tony's eyes, a huge blue map was formed, and red dots of light flashed on the huge map. Each dot of light was the location of a light screen. At first glance, it looks so dense that it seems to wrap the entire world. And just outside the aircraft carrier, outside the clouds, under the sun, there is also a huge amount of light screens, synchronized in real time. Tony was in a dilemma. Is there really a race with this kind of technological power? Dr. Banner, wearing headphones, looked at Tony blankly, with a look of disbelief on his face. What on earth are you going to play? How about it? Nick Fury's voice sounded from behind, and he walked into the research room in front of him. No clue. Tony put his hand on his chin, unable to find out. But, Banner immediately came over and looked out the window with an expression of disbelief. Look, what is that? Chapter 2. Inside the aircraft carrier. Loki, who had been beaten up, was now locked in a sealed round glass cover like a dog. He sat helplessly in the corner. After thinking about it, he still stretched out his fingers and flicked them. At least from the outside, he looked fine. But only he himself knew that the wound on his face was stinging. A few days ago. What kind of inhumane abuse did he go through? That green thing was like a dog, it was crazy, rubbing his dignity on the ground. Pa pa pa. His mind was filled with the echo of that incident. It was as if his brain was filled with water and he couldn't forget it at all. And suddenly, he seemed to see something, and put his face close to the glass cover, looking into the distance, at huge amounts of light screens in the sky. Inventory. Multi-universe breaking news. Big words appeared on the screen. Loki's mind was full of question marks. Asgard. A huge amount of squares, wow. Countless figures gathered here, looking at the suddenly changing light screen in the sky. The whole audience was in an uproar. The king of the gods is still sleeping, Queen Fricka is still in charge of the important matters now. Seeing the whole crowd change color, she immediately reached out to soothe him. Quiet. However, Fricka was also worried. Multi-universe? Do multiple parallel universes really exist? But suddenly I saw, a line of typing appears again. Welcome to watch, Multi-universe breaking news. Top 10 dimensional special characters. How can waste be turned into treasure? Asgard. The second prince, a good-for-nothing wizard with icy blood, respected by his father and loved by his mother. After killing my mother and destroying Asgard. Unspeakable secrets, gorgeous twists, classic interpretation, welcome to the birth of the god of stories, Loki. Countless people were shocked when they saw this scene. Everyone looked at Queen Fricka. The queen was also confused and couldn't believe it. Loki. Camartage. Top 10 dimensional special characters. How can waste be turned into treasure? Asgard. The second prince, a good-for-nothing wizard with icy blood, respected by his father and loved by his mother. After killing my mother and destroying Asgard. Unspeakable secrets, gorgeous twists, classic interpretation, welcome to the birth of the god of stories, Loki. Multi-universe, Flashpoint event. Doctor Strange whispered, at this moment, I look tired. He has just become the supreme sorcerer and now has to manage the entire Camartage. Countless mages, and matters of large and small file sizes. Just when he was about to get everything sorted out, huge amounts of change occurred. Even more exciting than the alien attack in New York. And no matter what method he used, he could never get to the bottom of the matter, nor could he trace the source. Behind the light screen, it seemed like the end of the world of pain, behind that barrier that could not be traced back at all. He doesn't believe that other universes really exist. Licking his lips, Doctor Strange's eyes are deep. So, what are you? Same time, the same topic was revealed on screens all over the world. Top 10 dimensional special characters, how can waste be turned into treasure? Asgard. The second prince, a good-for-nothing wizard with icy blood, respected by his father and loved by his mother. After killing my mother and destroying Asgard. Unspeakable secrets, gorgeous twists, classic interpretation, welcome to the birth of the god of stories, Loki. Queens. Ding-ling-ling. The cell phone suddenly rang. Brush Peter Parker opened his eyes instantly. At this moment, his body was lying on the roof. The sudden awakening made him fall subconsciously. But, his body seemed to be particularly light, and he flipped in the air. Gently lie on the ground with both hands and land steadily. Just like a gecko. There wasn't even a sound. The ringing sound of the cell phone was particularly harsh in his ears. He ran over quickly, picked up the phone, and saw the name of his good friend Ned. Parker answered the call and put the phone to his ear. Just as I was about to talk, I glanced at him. Hilly was shocked and stood still. Because outside the window, there was a huge amount of light screen with a lot of big words appearing on it. Parker. Ned's voice was excited. Parker, I'm. Look out the window. Ned became even more excited. I see. Parker looked shocked. At the same time. Midtown. The grey space seemed very solemn, and the dark sky seemed like it would rain at any time. Pa. Suddenly, a flash of lightning flashed across the sky. The top of the church. Garfield, the amazing Spider-Man, has taken off his cowl and is lying on it, waiting for the rain to come, but at this moment. He suddenly stood up, knelt on one knee, and looked up into the sky. Because, in keen perception. It seems like something is about to fall, really. The next moment. Crackle. Countless thunderbolts roared wildly, and lightning pierced through the air, as if to shatter the entire space. But, strangely, these countless lightnings seemed to be gathering together. Then, it turned into a huge amount of light screen, piercing through the clouds. And this. It seemed to be shown just for him. A certain world. In front of the quiet tombstone. Maguire Spider-Man, wearing a black windbreaker, with his hair combed meticulously, looks a little energetic. But at this moment, his face was slightly sad, and he couldn't hide his fatigue. Crouching slightly, he placed the white flower in his hand in front of the tombstone. On the tombstone, Harry's photo, still smiling, but he lost his best friend forever. 2 weeks ago, in the battle with Venom, at the last critical moment, Harry blocked the fatal damage for himself. Maguire Spider-Man, I don't know where to go in the future. And in the distance, Mary Jane strolled over, also wearing a black windbreaker and high heels. Looking at the front, Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and the photo of her former fiancé Harry opposite her, she was a little confused, not knowing whether she should accept Parker. I don't even know whether to leave here. Although she escaped death, she knew that Spider-Man could not belong to her alone forever. So, she mustered up her courage and walked towards the tombstone. Chapter 3. Peter. Mary Jane spoke up, that's enough. This time, Maguire Parker spoke first, closing his eyes, Mary Jane, let's separate. Boom. Suddenly there was a loud thunder in the sky. Maguire Parker suddenly looked up at the sky, and he keenly perceived that some special power was gathering. I have to go now. Without leaving any final explanation, he turned and left. The back figure is anxious and chic, at least, it's not like all these years of shyness and cowardice, and the pain of being trapped in this emotional game with Mary Jane. Even if he will regret it in the future, and this turn is a farewell forever. He also, without any hesitation. Parker. Seeing Parker's back, Mary Jane was stunned, tears dripping from her eyes. But when I turned my head, I found that the whole cemetery was empty. Parker. Mary Jane finally couldn't hold it anymore. At the same time, Spider-Man has already shot out his spider silk, heading towards the highest point in the entire city, which is where the tower used to be. When the bells rang loudly, when he was wearing the Venom suit, he was extremely sensitive to the sound, but now he could feel nothing but the noise. In the sky, crackle. Another flash of lightning, the whole city is still in good order. Cars were passing by on the road, and the roadside ponds were low, and the wheels rolled up dots of black water. The crowd was still anxious. Ding ding ding. There are still a lot of cars on the bridge, and in the congestion, countless car owners are honking their horns like crazy. This special sign of the times, different from the other two worlds, has formed the unique charm of this era. Wow! Spider-Man has landed on the church, with the cross in front of him. He climbed up the church. And right before his eyes, crash! Surrounded by countless lightning bolts, they gathered into a huge amount of light balls, which gently extended. An unbelievable scene happened right before Parker's eyes. A light screen, it's like the power of God has descended upon Earth. Top 10 dimensional special characters, how can waste be turned into treasure? Asgard. The second prince, a good-for-nothing wizard with icy blood, respected by his father and loved by his mother. After killing my mother and destroying Asgard. Unspeakable secrets, gorgeous twists, classic interpretation, welcome to the birth of the god of stories, Loki. A few lines of big words appeared. Maguire Spider-Man took off his mask. He did not feel any malice, but the light screen in front of him was extremely sci-fi beautiful. Multi-universe. A place of exile in the void. Roar! The terrifying sandstorm rushed towards the horizon from a distance. The shocking speed swept everything away as if it was going to swallow up countless things. The sand dragon opened its bloody mouth, revealing countless bloody fangs. This is actually a living being. And in a certain ruin, Russell, the entire ruins were crumbling, and sand was constantly falling from above. A group of completely disliked Loki-looking characters stared at each other with strange eyes, unable to hide their disgust. However, in order to survive, at this moment, everyone can only stay quietly. The leader Loki, who was sitting in the center, was able to calmly pick up the wine beside him and pour it into his mouth. Take a gulp. Young Loki, he held the crocodile in his arms and looked at the group of Loki variants in front of him quietly. Other Loki variants, there is the Viking Loki holding an axe, the weird Loki wearing a green suit with an evil smile on his face, a group of people. Finally, the terrifying sandstorm slowly disappears. The young boy Loki, holding the crocodile Loki in his arms, was the first to get out of the house. He really couldn't stand the weird atmosphere. Ever since he lost old Loki, he would never trust anyone again. I looked up at the sky, and it was like the sun was shining brightly after the rain. But he suddenly discovered that it seems like something special has entered my sight, one side. It's like a light screen of God's power. Oh my God! Young Loki was stunned. Behind him, other Loki variants also came out. Top 10 dimensional special characters, how can waste be turned into treasure? Asgard. The second prince, a good-for-nothing wizard with icy blood, respected by his father and loved by his mother. After killing my mother and destroying Asgard. Unspeakable secrets, gorgeous twists, classic interpretation, welcome to the birth of the god of stories, Loki. Looking at these lines of big words, leader Loki was stunned. He immediately thought of the previous one. And other Loki variants, all different Loki, is he, really him? And now the beast of nothingness, the raging time is getting more and more chaotic. Representing time and space, it is very likely that it has been disrupted. In fact, not long ago, there was news that the time manager, Conqueror Kong, was stabbed to death. All Loki variants are shocked. What is he going to do? Time Management Bureau. Looking at the sacred timeline management device that is about to explode, take a deep breath, 123, you can do it. Looking at the afro-haired Kong in front of him, Loki encouraged him patiently. Sylvie beside him looked unhappy. In her opinion, this was a waste of time. She pushed Kong towards the manager without hesitation. Good. Kong took a deep breath, rushed forward, and pushed open the manager's door with both hands. The next moment, looking at the completely chaotic and crazy timeline, which kept branching out, he gritted his teeth and take a step forward under unimaginable pressure. But suddenly, an extremely terrifying force instantly stripped him away. Ah! Disappeared without a trace amid the screams. At the door, Loki saw this scene and pursed his lips slightly. This was the first time he saw failure. And there seemed to be something wrong with his perception. Loki. Hill's voice kept slowing down in my mind. Crunch. Amid the harsh sound, his figure stretched infinitely and disappeared instantly. When it appears again, we have come to the end of another time, this is the place where Administrator Victor is. But just as he was about to speak, but suddenly he was shocked to find that in front of Victor, in the empty room, an extremely huge light screen appeared. Top 10 dimensional special characters, how can waste be turned into treasure? Asgard. The second prince, a good-for-nothing wizard with icy blood, respected by his father and loved by his mother. After killing my mother and destroying Asgard. Unspeakable secrets, gorgeous twists, classic interpretation, welcome to the birth of the god of stories, Loki. Big words appear. Chapter 4. Looking at the light screen in front of him, Loki was stunned. It's like casting for him. Click to watch. At the same time, the same prompt appeared on all the light screens. Watch. Maguire, Spider-Man, was the first to click confirm. He even reached into his pocket and took out a candy, stuffed it into his mouth, and lay down on the roof of the church. Watch. Garfield Spider-Man hesitated for a moment, then reached out and clicked to watch. Asgard. I don't know who confirmed it in their heart. The video has started. S.H.I.E.L.D. Air and Space Carrier. Oh. This option shocked Dr. Banner. Suddenly, buzz. An explosion sounded beside him, and in front of Iron Man, a steel wall appeared, and a special energy shield protected him. Banner had a puzzled expression, full of question marks. Nick Fury crossed his arms and looked calmly at the light screen. No one knows the secret of this light screen, and no one knows whether it is a weapon or equipment. It's an invasion by a cosmic force. Still. Universe-level special power. Watch. The boiled egg head still nodded slightly. The light screen moved suddenly. Actually, I am a person with a very strong sense of self-esteem. It's been like this since I was little. Like this. I am a god, stupid creature. Loki, wearing a black leather jacket and a green cape, appeared on the screen, glaring ahead, but, his face, as white as tofu, was now covered with many scars, and his originally handsome slicked back hair was now messy and disheveled. But when he spoke, his tone was particularly domineering. Asgard. Oh. Loki. The girl in the white gauze dress had a look of surprise on her face. She recognized that this was the second prince of Asgard. 1 hour, everyone was talking about it. It's really Loki. But he looks injured and a little tired. This outfit was given to him by the queen when he first mastered magic. Yes. It was Loki's coming-of-age ceremony. Why are there so many scars on his face, and his clothes are so tattered? Did he fight? Compared with the majestic king of the gods Odin, under the management of Queen Fricka, everyone can speak freely. And, now Thor and Loki have gone to Earth for training, and there are basically no major events here. Everyone present was quite surprised to suddenly see Loki's image. However, someone soon proposed, what is he doing? Have no idea. Queen Fricka shook her head slightly and curled her lips, but he must have done something bad. Maybe Thor beat him up again. Looking at Loki in front of him, Fricka looked calm, even, she wanted to laugh. After all, this is still our child. Watching him grow up, he will eventually become a real man. But now? Still a long way to go. This expression is exactly the same as when he was a kid and did bad things, but he was still justified. Thinking of this, why? Queen Fricka shook her head gently, wearing a crown on her head and lying on a chair in a light gauze skirt. She looked so pitiful. She sighed, what should I do if the child doesn't listen? Just give him a beating. Ha 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 ha. Everyone burst into laughter. S.H.I.E.L.D. Aerospace Aircraft Carrier. Loki. Iron Man hesitated and said, click, click, click. After determining that there was no danger, the energy shield on the arm automatically ejected and retracted, turning into hand armor again. He looked at Banner beside him, shouldn't he be locked in the dog cage? Dog cage? Banner almost choked, that's an energy shield, okay. But, it looks like it's in your house. No wonder, I said it looked familiar. Tony picked up a dessert on the table next to him and stuffed it into his mouth. Nick Fury still looked serious as he watched. There are at least hundreds of millions of playback points around the world, playing. Dog cage. Oh no, in the energy shield. Hiss. Loki took a deep breath, and his eyes widened instantly, don't let go, don't let go. Crunch. Looking at the familiar scene in front of him, he clenched his fists and his arms trembled slightly. At this moment, the air seemed to freeze. This dark history was so familiar to him that he had even anticipated what would happen next. And he. Even more unexpected. In the picture. I won't be bullied by you. Loki roared, very weakly, yet seemed very stubborn. Suddenly. Whoosh. His figure suddenly disappeared from the spot, as if he was pulled by something and lost his balance. The next moment. A green fat man in shorts appeared in the center of the screen, his muscles looked ferocious. He has a muscular body, and his muscles are all over his body. His muscles are small but can generate unimaginable power. The figure is even taller. At this time, Loki, who was just making harsh remarks, now has one leg pinched by huge amounts of hands. Bang! Amid huge amounts of explosions, Loki's body was smashed hard to the ground. The marble floor cracked with a clacking sound, and exploded, splashing out countless pieces and sinking into the ground. Bang! 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 This green fat giant seemed to be crazy and treated Loki in his hand as a toy. He swung his arms quickly and smashed them on the ground madly. Pa! Pa! Bang! Stones and debris flew everywhere, huge amounts of pits were smashed into the ground, and the ground was smashed and exploded. Hulk paused. But without any hesitation, he once again threw the toy-like Loki in his hand. Pa! 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 More marble floors were smashed and cracked, with deep depressions forming like a spider web, with dense cracks bursting out. The ground that was so smooth just now is now full of pits. Loki's green robe was like a rag, waving in the air. He himself. It's more like a large toy, which Hulk holds in his hand and plays with at will. Hulk finally lost his temper and threw Loki away. Loki, who had just been connected and had only minor scratches, now had more scratches and even bleeding. The tattered clothes are even more tattered now. He just lay on the ground with his mouth wide open and a look of despair on his face. His eyes were wide open, like a fish that was about to die due to lack of oxygen. Chapter 5. Except for the chest still rising and falling, it's almost the same as hanging. Earth, a pub. On the screen in front of him, Loki was being beaten violently, and the tavern suddenly became quiet. Sitting by the window. Puff. Watching the video of Loki being beaten up and smashed around like trash, Thor spurted out the wine in his mouth. The man opposite him lowered his head in confusion and looked at his clothes. Sorry, sorry. Soul smiled shyly, a little silly, and it was hard to hold back his smile. After all, there is nothing better than seeing your brother getting beaten up. Besides, this guy really deserves to be beaten. He made a mess of Midgard. Fortunately, there is the Avengers, otherwise it might have been destroyed by this guy. And oh, Earth. The wine on Earth is really awesome. The movement here immediately attracted everyone's attention. Sorry. Hiccup. Thor burped and felt that, after seeing this video, the most important thing he should do now is to go to the Sky Fortress to meet Loki and ask him how he feels. After all, who can see with their own eyes the scene of themselves being hugged, broadcast throughout the universe? Good guy, I wonder if Asgard can see it. If Asgard can see it, it would be exciting. Ha 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 ha. Thor was so excited that he almost trembled. He swayed, stood up from the chair, picked up the umbrella beside the table, pushed open the door and walked into the open space. Keeping S.H.I.E.L.D's instructions in mind, he deliberately found a sparsely populated place. Afterwards, sniff sniff. He swung the hammer in his hand, generating tremendous force, and suddenly rose into the air, carrying himself with him as he flew out. Target, S.H.I.E.L.D. carrier. Asgard. All the people who were laughing just now stopped laughing and looked at the video in front of them with confused faces. Even seeing Loki's miserable appearance in the video, many people's mouths twitched. Although their race is honored as the gods, and Loki is even called the king of gods. This is all due to their extremely strong physiques, and only sharp steel can break through their defenses. And their physique is much stronger than the weak Midgardians. Several Asgard guards who had been to Earth were a little bit incredulous at the sight of Loki's miserable appearance. Several people looked at each other, others just waved their hands in silence. Is there such a thing on Earth? I don't know. The green fat man. But, although they are physically strong, but the huge amounts of marble floor were smashed directly on my face, and I smashed it into pieces. If an ordinary mother saw her child in such a miserable state, she would definitely feel heartbroken. But this, I'm afraid it will be a bit painful. Queen Fricka grinned and looked at Loki in the video with disgust. She really didn't want to admit that the cub in the video was raised by her. A little silly. Maguire Spider-Man World. Oh. He lay comfortably on the roof of the church, watching the video in front of him. The man in the video was beaten violently. He also took the time to put a box of biscuits next to him, picked up a biscuit, put it gently into his mouth, and chewed it with his teeth. It's really scary. Even after being hit like that, there's no scratch at all. Awesome. He looked surprised. After all, no ordinary person can withstand such a beating. After being hit a few times like this, I'm afraid that the brain will be shaken. To know. The last person who was so strong was himself, stretching out his legs to stop the train. Now thinking about it, he was really brave. Moreover, his physical fitness is also terrifyingly strong. Queens? What? Spider-Man Holland looked at the video in front of him with a lot of question marks on his head. He reached out and scratched his head. In the gap between teeth, only 3 in 1 finally popped out. I'm special. The land of nothingness. A variant of Loki, looking at the video in front of him. Hiss. They all took a breath of cold air in unison, and all the Loki variants looked at each other, but then looked away. Because. Awkward. This is so FG embarrassing. The guy in the video is really Loki, but. That's stupid. Like a fool. You were being swung to the ground like a stick. Where's your magic? I was treated like this for saying something mean. Hiss, this green fat guy must be a dog. Hearing these words, the little boy Loki was speechless. The Loki in the video is so embarrassing, it's really embarrassing for all Lokis. Even the crocodile Loki in his arms licked his lips, turned his head away and shook his head slightly. At the same time, Time Management Bureau. In the room of the first manager Victor. Loki looked at himself in the video, but froze in his tracks looking at the familiar scenes in the video. He thought of the first time he invaded New York. Use the teleportation device placed by the space cube. Directly teleport the Chitauri army over here. If there weren't the Avengers on Earth, he might have really ruled Midgard. But if it weren't for his reckless behavior, Thanos wouldn't have paid too much attention to the Earth and knew the whereabouts of the Infinity Stones. His hometown, his home. Asgard, and it won't. At this moment, he was filled with deep self-blame and looked a little depressed. Suddenly, so, you are really him. Victor looked at me strangely. 3 parts of ridicule, 3 parts of indifference, and even 3 parts of disdain. Loki hesitated, then covered his face with his hands. Time Management Bureau. Because Loki's time slipped away and he disappeared, Sylvie and the others were left here again, then. Looking at the stupid and pig-like Loki in the video, Sylvie's eyes widened, she was so shocked. What the hell is this? Famous scene in Chapter 6. Loki flirts with a girl. She turns her head away and dies. Is this still the handsome Loki? This is. Is he still the Loki who is confident of victory and rushes back and forth to solve a time crisis? That time traveler, omnipotent. Well, indeed. This is something he can really do. At this moment, although she didn't want to admit it, the fact that she had already admitted it in her heart broke Sylvie's defense. The dark history of the guy she likes. Earth, S.H.I.E.L.D. Air, and Space Carrier. Banner was a little embarrassed. It was as if he was seen through by Iron Man Tony, in particular. The look Iron Man cast at him even made him subconsciously move away from him, as if he was on guard against a pervert. It was Hulk who did it, not me. Dr. Banner waved his hands awkwardly. But as soon as he turned his head, he met Nick Fury's wise eyes. This is totally unwashable. Inside the transparent glass cover. Loki, who always cares about his image, watching the video in front of me, I was beaten so badly, and that big guy was like a beast, the Hulk. Just like an animal. He lifted his legs and smashed him madly, smashing the ground into pieces, and even smashed his face against the ground repeatedly. His face. Loki, the god of trickery, even in the entire Asgard, he once pretended to be Odin, the king of gods, and enjoyed supreme glory. Jaja, currently, is a very powerful mage. Just like that, the beast pressed me to the ground and rubbed me like crazy. Looking at him lying on the ground like a dead fish, his chest rising and falling, breathing in less than breathing out, boom. Loki's mind was struck by a bolt from the blue. A thunderclap exploded in his brain, it was as if his brain exploded. My mind was filled with tricks, but in the end I only wrote 2 words. Completion. Completely completed. His image was ruined. And this is not over yet, crunch. The door opens, Loki saw the person he least wanted to see at this moment in his life. Thor. Still a smiling Thor. Loki Thor came over with a smile that the laughter that can't be concealed at all, funny. Loki's defense was broken, and the image magic he had casually cast earlier failed, revealing him sitting decadently against the wall. He turned his head away, not wanting to pay attention to Thor. But after a moment's hesitation, he still asked, how many people have seen this image? This is his last stubbornness. Oh, you mean Midgard? Thor hesitated. Belch he burped again, swung the hammer in his hand gently, and then pointed the hammer at Loki, or Asgard. An irrepressible smile appeared on his face again, a little presumptuous. Loki opened his eyes wide and remained silent. Because at this moment, his heart is dead, completely dead. The light screen spoke again, oh. Sometimes a little romantic. Strange tavern, on the small chair. The woman with the headband of the god of trickery, and opposite, Loki, with his slicked back hair, changed into some ordinary clothes. Now, the two looked at each other. In a frozen atmosphere. Loki stretched out his left hand, and a green magic suddenly appeared in the palm of his left hand. Pa, pa, pa. A small flame rises from the palm of the hand into the air, like a miniature firework. Countless sparks exploded in the sky, fireworks burst. Sylvie was stunned. She had never seen such a scene before. Loki smiled, and seemed very satisfied with the warmth of the moment. The land of nothingness. All Loki variants were stunned. So, the one sitting opposite is also a Loki variant. What is he doing? Leader Loki blinked, he rubbed his eyes to make sure he was not wrong. All Loki variants can recognize Loki variants. Because each of them is a Loki of the universe. Flirting with girls. Viking Loki uttered 2 words, at this moment, the axe in his hand no longer smells good. Asgard. Wow. Queen Fricka was the first to shout, what a beautiful girl. But why do I feel a little familiar with her? It is indeed beautiful. Valkyrie folded her arms, a rare moment of relaxation. Loki didn't care at all about being beaten just now, and now he felt a little relieved. S.H.I.E.L.D. aircraft carrier. The smile on Thor's face froze. Just seeing how badly Loki was beaten, he couldn't help but come over to tease him. And now, Loki. Flirting. He actually flirted with a girl. And there is actually a girl who is willing to go with Loki. And what about him? Still single now? Thor turned his head and looked. Loki also looked confused. Watch the video quietly. Especially watching Sylvie in the video. I don't know why, he always felt that there was a special connection between him and the girl in front of him. However, he was sure that he really has never flirted with a girl. I searched my mind, but I couldn't remember this scene. At this moment, he was shocked. Multi-universe, does it really exist? Time Management Bureau. Oh. What the hell? Mobius looked surprised, turned his head and looked at Sylvie, pointing at her helplessly. He pointed at the video again and hesitated, you guys. What does the little look suggest? Yes. We. Crunch. Sylvie clenched her fist, looking a little embarrassed, yes, it's true, okay, don't say anything more. At this moment, she also experienced social death. Especially after living in the time dimension for more than 10 years and growing up, her heart is still like that of a girl. The first generation of time management. Loki felt warm in his heart when he saw this scene. He thought about what he and Sylvie wanted to meet, know, and experience together. And these fireworks are the beginning of this love. But suddenly, the screen changes, no, no, no. Loki in the video spoke anxiously and shook his head to deny something. But, in front of him, Sylvie changed her clothes and didn't have time to react. SS. Her body was torn apart like noodles, turning into countless lines that bloomed and exploded in the air before her eyes. She. Total annihilation. The last scene was frozen on Sylvie's gentle face. Chapter 7. No no no. Loki's eyes were moist, and he reached out eagerly to grab Sylvie. But this scene, Sylvie also wanted to reach out, but finally grabbed something. But pa! Her body completely disappeared, completely vanishing in space. This scene is so powerless. The first generation of time management. Seeing the scene where S.H.I.E.L.D disappeared in the video, Loki's eyes were filled with tears. He looked to his side. The location is exactly the same as in the video. Thump, thump. When Loki thought of Sylvie disappearing completely, he felt an indescribable pain in his heart. He was completely submerged. Asgard. Queen Fricka, who had just smiled, immediately sat up from her chair with a serious look on her face. What is this? Where the hell is Loki? This is not our world. The others were all stunned. One by one, looking at each other, the scene in the video is so weird. A living person disappeared right before my eyes. It's annihilation, complete disappearance. Heimdall said solemnly, as a former subordinate of Odin, Midar's strength is unquestionable, even. In some ways, he is still the fighting force of Asgard. Now, Queen Fricka finally showed some worry. Loki. Where are you? At this moment, she finally thought of the title just now, turn waste into treasure. Frost Blood, killed his mother with his own hands, destroyed Asgard. A strange emotion arose in Queen Fricka's heart. Is that true? Earth. S.H.I.E.L.D aircraft carrier. Thor, who had been gritting his teeth just now, saw this scene and immediately looked at Loki. What is that? Thor's expression was solemn. Every Asgardian god can clearly feel that the process of life passing away is fundamentally irreversible. Although, he and Loki have never gotten along since they were little. But that's obviously the girl Loki likes. It turns out. Just disappeared right before my eyes. I have no idea. Loki leaned against the wall and looked at Thor helplessly. I don't know where that is. I don't know who that girl is, and it feels like another me. You. Saul was confused. Loki. The other Loki. Loki said, his expression weak. So, it's true. Thor looked at the video in front of him with a shocked expression. Multi-universe, it exists like this. Camartage. Another world. Steven sat on the futon, watching what was happening. He could clearly feel the destructive law brought about by annihilation. Moreover, this Loki, the feeling he gave was completely different from the young man who had invaded New York before. And, a long time ago, he came into contact with the Eye of Agamotto, Trinity, White Magic. He had read many legends of the world and also read many documents in Camartage. Dark Dimension Mephistodormamu, an unimaginable character, this is real existence, and, as his strength increased, he could feel more and more that the wall of this world was just like the membrane inside an egg. The wall of the world not only protects this world, but also prevents this world from connecting with other worlds. There may be other. This is what is called a multi-universe. Time Management Bureau. Seeing herself completely disappear in the image before her eyes, Sylvie was stunned. B15 beside him was also stunned. Does this mean that Loki has failed? I have no idea. Sylvie shook her head slightly. She didn't know how to answer this question. Because Kong mutation, just now turned into ashes right before my eyes. Only Kong can repair the sacred time manager in front of him. Now, the sacred timeline was already in disarray. After losing Kang's management, countless time branches were born in the sacred timeline. Moreover, these time branches are constantly giving birth to more time branches. The entire universe is still crumbling. The energy in front of me exceeded the load. And only Kong can add this payload. Then they are using the time machine to cut off those unnecessary time branches. All this, it's all because of her anger, killed Kong, the administrator of the void. So, now. Sylvie's mind was in a mess. Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded. I was so naive. In the video, the background appears in Asgard. In front of Asgard's wall of merit, Odin, with an eye patch on his right eye, waved his staff. I am Odin, the king of the gods. Wow! Countless people knelt on one knee. But being educated by Thor, the picture changed. Odin lay comfortably on the chair and ate the grapes handed to him by the maid. Looks a bit lazy. Sudden, boom. Thor's figure appeared, descended from the sky, and landed steadily. Then, he walked in front of Odin with a tiger step and an angry face. In full view of the public. Thor didn't even turn his head and threw the Thor's hammer in his hand far away. Buzz! Thor's hammer flew away at an extremely fast speed. And Saul, right in front of everyone, he grabbed Odin's clothes and stood behind him. Odin did not resist and even looked a little panicked. Thor stood behind Odin and said in a cold tone, "After 10 seconds, the hammer will fly back. If you don't reveal your true face, then you will definitely have to experience the power of the hammer." He looked into the distance. 10. 9. Thor himself shouted the countdown, finally, 3. When the sound came, Thor's hammer could already be seen flying from a distance. "Okay, I give up." Odin panicked again, and he spoke quickly. Whoosh! Green magic enveloped the whole body. The god Odin, who was so solemn just now, suddenly turned into Loki in a green robe. Snort! Thor pushed Loki away, stretched out his right hand, and grasped the hammer with a snap. Loki was pushed down, before I could react. Thor had already placed the hammer on Loki's chest, pinning him to the ground with ease. Ah! Loki tried his best to push the hammer away, but failed, and his face turned red. Chapter 8. This scene, it's so funny, just like disciplining a naughty child. No one else realizes this. But Asgard. Everyone had black lines on their heads. God King Odin. That guy Loki actually dared to pretend to be the God King Odin. It's beyond the pranks of naughty kids. Queen Fricka put her hand on her forehead, unable to bear to look at her cub. Oh! There were exclamations from the crowd. I never realized before that Loki is such a character. I told you he's not a good guy. He's not worthy of trust. Thor's confidant scolded without hesitation. On Earth. S.H.I.E.L.D. aircraft carrier. Oh, yeah. It looks good. Loki, who was locked in the dog cage, nodded slightly. Before he finished speaking, bang! A small stone had hit him on the head. Just stay quiet. Thor shook his head, a look of disappointment in his performance. He turned and left the cage in front of him. Even if you have a weak brain, you can still see everything in the video. This is not the world before my eyes. Or what should happen at this moment? And he cares more about Loki, accidentally killed his mother and destroyed Asgard. These two sentences. His steps subconsciously became much faster. Now there are the people from S.H.I.E.L.D., he will not fight alone. Moreover, everything that happened now has not happened yet, and there is still a possibility of recovery. A certain time and space. Wanda, who had just completed the transformation of origin magic power, looked dejectedly at the lifeless land in front of her. She sat on the ground helplessly. Here. She has the best memories she ever had, in a small town world created by magic. There is her, and her lover Vision, there are 2 children, this should be the happiest place that makes up for all the regrets. But because of the emergence of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the greed of the Dark Witch Agatha, everything became an illusion. And everything seemed to have never disappeared. Only, she could no longer sense the presence of Vision, nor could she sense the presence of the 2 children at all. Until the appearance of the inventory video in front of me. An unprecedented light appeared in Wanda's eyes. Multi-universe. Video continues. Sometimes, I don't know what I'm confused about. It seems like I have always wanted to strive for something since I was a child. In Loki's voice, the Temple of Asgard appeared on the screen. At this time, the god King Odin sat majestically on the throne with an angry look on his face. No. Father. We should destroy all of Jotunheim. Thor, with scars all over his face, said with a red face and thick neck, all giants of Jotunheim should not exist. They are a race of violent nature. Thor. Odin's icy roar rang out. Looking at his angry father in front of him, Thor was instantly speechless, but his clenched fists showed his inner dissatisfaction. You disappoint me so much. Odin's chest heaved, and he was very angry. Finally, he made up his mind and said, from today on, you will be deprived of Thor's power, and for your behavior of not obeying orders and invading Jotunheim without authorization, I will exile you. Wow! Odin stretched out his right hand, paw. A flash of lightning appeared and hit Thor hard. Hwala. Thor's armor fell off one after another, and he was shocked to find that the strength in his body was also fading away. Until boom! He lost the qualification to pick up Thor's hammer, and Thor's hammer smashed directly to the ground. Loki, who was standing by, was frightened by the scene. He whispered, "Father." "But I didn't think." "Shut up." Odin responded with a stern voice and a gaze that could not be looked directly at. Loki was scared and didn't dare to speak anymore. This tragic scene. At this moment, he was like a little quail, not daring to say a word. Activate the Rainbow Bridge and exile him to Midgard. If you don't realize your mistake, you will never be able to return to Asgard in this lifetime. Odin spoke again. Yes. Heimdall was respectful like a servant. Click. He twisted the blade in his hand. Buzz. An unimaginable huge energy directly enveloped Thor's body, forming a transmission channel. No. Father. Thor was thrown in. He screamed, "Snap, snap, snap." There were lightning lines on his body, and all his armor was shattered, taking away his divine power and safety. But to no avail. Until Odin stretched out his hand, and Thor's hammer flew into his hand automatically. He whispered a spell, "No matter who it is, as long as they are qualified to hold Thor's hammer, they will have the power of Thor." Buzz. As soon as he finished speaking, he stretched out his hand and threw Thor's hammer forward, and Thor's hammer fell towards the earth along the Rainbow Bridge. Until this moment, Loki still didn't dare to say a word. I was 18 that year, standing by like a minion. But soon, a new screen appears. Thor regained his divine power. In his left hand he holds Thor's hammer, and in his right hand he holds a box, which contains the blue tesseract. The scene changes to show two guards pulling Loki to the hall. At this moment, Loki had an iron chain around his neck and his arms were tied with iron chains, like a sinner. Ka-la! Ka-la! With every step, the chain swayed slightly. Loki looked calm at this moment. It's completely different from the cowardly quail I was before. This is when he was brought back by Thor after the failed invasion of Earth. Passing through the hall in front of you, this is the temple of the god King Odin, with bonfires burning around it. On the towering steps, Odin sits on the throne. The guards followed behind. And right beside, Queen Fricka, stood by with an uneasy look on her face, looking deeply at the scene in front of her. She whispered, "Loki." The next second, "Hello, mother." Loki turned his head and smiled, as if he didn't care about his situation at all. "This smile comes from the heart," he whispered, "are you proud of me?" The tone of his voice was even gentler. But, Queen Fricka just shook her head gently, "Please, don't add fuel to the fire." "What do you mean?" Loki smiled nonchalantly. Chapter 9. That's enough. Odin's cold voice rang out, interrupting the conversation between the two people. Queen Fricka and Loki both looked towards the throne on the platform at the same time, where sat the god King Odin. "I want to talk to the sinner alone," Odin said again. "This has resulted in an expulsion." Fricka looked at Loki again, her eyes full of worry, but she had no choice but to leave. After his mother left, Loki no longer felt any pressure. He looked up at Odin and asked, "What's this about?" Snap! He put his feet together, and the materials on his feet touched each other. At this moment, he still looked like a bohemian child. But in Odin's eyes, this is rebellion and ignorance. Odin, sitting on the throne, shook his head gently, "Don't you really know that you have committed a grave sin? Wherever you are, there will be war, destruction, and death. This is simply the ultimate expression of being disappointed in someone." "But I didn't think," Loki simply said, "as a benevolent god, I will go to Middle-earth to rule the people of Earth, just like you." He didn't care. He looked up and saw the throne, his father, and Odin, the king of gods who represented majesty and power. "But I didn't think, we are not gods, we also have birth, aging, sickness and death." Odin shook his head slightly, with a hint of helplessness in his tone, "just like humans." His tone was calm, but he still suppressed his anger. He looked down at the child in front of him. He knew that this child had been mischievous since childhood and had special tricks. "And I learned a lot of magic from Queen Fricka. But we have a lifespan of 5,000 years. Loki still argued, looking up at Odin's eyes. At present, this seems to be a challenge to the royal power. I have to say, in everyone's opinion, Loki is really brave at this moment. Odin shook his head slightly, not wanting to continue this topic. Everything that happened today stems from Loki's pursuit of the throne. At least for now, Loki in front of him is still just a child. But, Loki gritted his teeth slightly, that's my right. His eyes were even filled with some anger and rage. This sentence fully represents his own understanding. One moment. Odin, who had endured for a long time, could no longer bear it, and he roared, "Your right is death." Loki's expression changed, he blinked, and looked at Odin with some surprise. "You died young and were abandoned on the cold rocks. If I hadn't taken you in, you wouldn't hate me as much as you do now." Odin lowered his head and looked at Loki with cold eyes. A tone of compassion, but this cold and pitying tone is the most hurtful. Loki couldn't bear it any longer. He took a step forward and looked up at Odin. "If I shouldn't live, please have mercy on me and let me die. I don't like this conversation. I just..." He bowed his head. After thinking about what to say next, he chose to remain silent after a moment. "I really don't like it." He raised his head and looked at Odin, and from the rebelliousness at the beginning, he had now turned into calmness. "If it weren't for Fricka, you would have died long ago. I'm going to make you stay in the dungeon for the rest of your life." Odin's angry look turned into indifference, and he gave orders like a king at this moment. But, hearing this, Loki's eyes immediately turned sad. He was dragged backwards by the guards on both sides, his eyes full of unwillingness. "What about Thor? You want that idiot to be king and leave me to spend the rest of my life in jail?" At this moment, he spoke out what was in his heart, wanting to fight for it even at the last minute. He didn't want to admit defeat, let alone admit defeat in such a cowardly way. In this game, he had never been taken seriously. Even, this moment. After both of them had caused such terrible disasters, they unexpectedly got completely different results. One was just sent to Earth for training, while the other had to spend the rest of his life in prison. Thor must clean up the mess you left behind, and he must restore order to the 9 kingdoms. Odin looked down at Loki and nodded slightly. "Yes, he will be king." Snap! The guards on both sides of his body reached out and patted Loki on the shoulders. "Even if they knew, the person in front of me is the second prince of Asgard, but, at this moment, Loki is just a criminal, a man who caused trouble and death. The culprit who even messed up the entire earth." 1. He was branded by Odin, the king of the gods, and would be imprisoned in a dungeon for the rest of his life. So, he lost the identity he was proud of. He was dragged by the chain step by step away from the temple in front of him and towards the dungeon, completely. Become a prisoner. Or, become a loser. Earth. S.H.I.E.L.D. aircraft carrier. Seeing new content in front of you, after 2 seconds of silence, Iron Man Tony looked at the people in front of him and said, "This is so unfair. You know, I value freedom, but I value fairness even more." After Thor caused a huge disaster, he was simply sent to Earth for training. Later, when he realized his mistake, he regained the power of Thor and picked up Thor's hammer. This almost killed the entire giants of Jotunheim clan. Dr. Banner was silent for 2 seconds and then nodded gently. "I agree with your point of view. However, what Loki did directly affected our world, and he killed Agent Coulson." Just then, Captain America, holding a shield, opened the door and walked in. The curvy figure, the surging pectoral muscles, the blonde hair, he shook his head slightly. "There is no right or wrong in committing a crime. No matter who it is, they must be held accountable for their actions and must be punished." "All right." Iron Man raised his hands. "I surrender." Time Management Bureau. Loki. Sylvie said the name. Once upon a time, 2 people cherished each other. And she never knew about Loki's past. Now it seems that those childish behaviors were just Loki's self-protection. Although Odin, the king of gods, seems fair, however, for my 2 children, it is completely different. Especially when it comes to Loki, there is no tolerance, only stinging words. And the coldest words hurt the most. The last scene freezes on Loki's distraught expression. Chapter 10. This moment, Sylvie actually felt a little sorry for that guy. She never knew about Loki's past, and only knew about him from a few words. It seems like life is not happy. At this moment, she knew everything. Asgard. Loki. Queen Fricka looked at Loki in the video. "Watching the child grow up little by little in front of me, but going astray because of my mistakes." As a mother, she felt a strong sense of remorse. Although she once had a happy time with Loki, and she taught him magic since he was a child. But life imprisonment. Even as a mother, he felt powerless against such punishment. It would be great if he could really understand. In the video, a new screen appeared. The prison looks extremely tight, and all of it has special transparent walls, but they are mostly small houses. Desk, coffee table, toilet, small bed. In fact, I was not mature at that time, and I did not expect that all this was due to my own naivety. During the time I was imprisoned, I felt extremely bored. All I see every day are prisoners coming and going. But my mother's books make me less bored. Although my father is strict and does not allow anyone to visit me. But my mother's figure always appears by my side, bringing delicious food, fresh books, and my mother's shadow. Makes me feel less lonely. I thought it would be like this for the rest of my life. It's actually pretty good. But, that day, I made a huge mistake. It made me regret it and almost collapse. Familiar cage, the figure of Queen Fricka appeared before Loki, as if the queen was really beside Loki. Everyone also understands that this is just a projection. Do you know how many lives you have destroyed on Earth? Fricka brought up the topic again. She looked at Loki with a kind gaze. With a mother's kind advice to her child. But I didn't think. Loki, however, looked impatient, and retorted like a child who had not grown up. Compared to the great Odin, these few people are nothing. He looked nonchalant, even though he was locked in this small cage. While speaking, his face was full of stubbornness and reluctance. Looking at Loki in front of her, Fricka said patiently again, "Your father." She was about to speak, suddenly, "He is not my father." Loki turned around suddenly and roared, his cheeks even reddened with anger as he spoke. In the small space before my eyes, Rage's voice just sounded, "This is a horrific scene." Just like a wounded little beast, it releases its wildness at this moment. Even, countless people in front of the video were shocked. But Fricka was not angry. She just calmly stretched out her hand and asked, "Am I your mother?" In a word, she wanted to see if the injured little beast in front of her could still care about this last family affection. One moment. Loki was stunned. Looking at his mother in front of him, he was completely stunned. He opened his eyes wide. But I don't dare to look at this problem directly. Looking at the Queen Mother in front of him, he was silent. After a long silence, he still chose the wild side, "You are not." Although the sound was much weaker, and there was not even the manic scene just now. But once these words were spoken, he realized his mistake immediately. One moment. After hearing this, Fricka's eyes became confused and empty. She is a mother, even though the child in front of her is not her own, she still gives him the greatest maternal love. Even more caring. In order to make up for him, he even shared his magical power with him. But at this moment, she felt a little heartbroken. Loki panicked. "No. Mother, I..." He rushed forward and tried to hold his mother's hand. But... swoosh! His hands shone through the green light, and the figure in front of him was just a projection. Fricka disappeared. Loki just froze in place. And then, he finally woke up and realized what a mistake he had made. What does he want to say? But... looking at the empty cage in front of him, he finally... I could only walk to the wall helplessly, lean against it and curl up my legs. He looked like a completely insecure person, but at this moment he was no longer a wounded little beast. He became like a wounded child again. At that time, he doesn't understand anything. Until... the Dark Elf King and the Dark Elves invaded Asgard. Now in the Queen's chamber, the Queen was grabbed by the neck by the Dark Elf and asked coldly, "Where are the TIE particles?" Fricka was restrained, and she couldn't move at all. "I won't tell you." Queen Fricka gritted her teeth slightly. Obviously, she didn't want to reveal where the TIE particles were. Behind her, the sharp blade was already against her waist. "Opposite, I believe this." The Dark Elf King walked over calmly with a pair of scarlet pupils. The next moment, "Ka!" The Dark Elf clenched the blade in his hand. Earth, S.H.I.E.L.D. aircraft carrier. Thor was upset when he saw this scene. Who is the person in the video? It's his mother, his biological mother. Even if what you see is just a video, just a projection. No, 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 no. Thor panicked and quickly spoke out to stop it. In a cage. No, don't. Loki stood up. He had an ability suppression collar on his neck, and his entire body was sore from the beating. But this did not stop him from standing up. I watched this scene with my eyes wide open. He shouted anxiously, "Don't want the first generation of time management. No." Loki, who had already seen the trajectory of his life once, at this moment, he whispered in a low voice, with a pleading tone, "No." But he knew that there was nothing he could do to change this. His eyes were wet. He couldn't hide at all, he could only watch. "Look at that sword." Base the sharp blade pierced through Queen Fricka's back and pierced her body. A red blood stain was stabbed out. "Ahoy!" Fricka opened her eyes wide, feeling the pain, and blood slowly flowed down the corner of her mouth. One moment, she was killed by this sword. Just as the dark elf let go of Fricka, Queen Fricka's body slid to the ground helplessly, no longer alive. Chapter 11. Different time and space, no. All Loki shouted at the same time, because this is a pain that every Loki cannot erase, and they can clearly see it in the video. It was because I was imprisoned. So, he missed the last chance to protect his mother. My mother's death is inevitable. It's like something that simply can't be changed. Asgard. Everyone watching this scene was also stunned. Queen Heimdall looked at Fricka with a look of deep respect. In the combat-oriented society of Asgard, the fighting power of male gods is undoubtedly respected, while female gods are relatively weaker. But Queen Fricka, even when facing death, never gave in. At this moment, won the respect of everyone, even many Asgardians even knelt on one knee to show respect to the god King Odin. At this moment, they showed their respect to the queen deserves, but after seeing the video in front of her, Fricka's heart rumbled like a thunder, as if the sky had fallen. It's not because he saw his own death. After all, everyone grows old, gets sick, and dies. This is the law of nature. But, seeing the imprisoned Loki in the video, and Thor who went to Earth to train them. How sad it is to see this image. Earth. S.H.I.E.L.D. aircraft carrier. Mother. Looking at the video in front of him, Saul couldn't control himself. He covered his face and cried. This is his biological mother. Although he has never been as naughty as Loki, however, the Queen Mother was also worried about him. No matter what time it was, he would always be that immature child. Whenever he returns to his mother's side, his heart can be calmed down. Whenever he returns to his mother's side, his mother's first words to him are always encouragement. Give him a hug, give him affirmation, even, sometimes he was very envious of the care his mother gave Loki, but he was not jealous. Because, this is his mother. But when I think of Loki's reaction when he sees this image, as a brother, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. Although he and Loki don't get along, this can't break the brotherhood between the two. This younger brother is not mature, but he is still his younger brother. Video continues. Honestly, after that period of time, I just thought the mother was angry at an immature child. And for the rest of the time, I remained in that prison, that hell-like place that trapped my body and my spirit. I look forward to my mother being like she used to be, even if it's just her image that appears beside me. Until my mother appeared beside me, I wanted to tell her in person that I didn't mean those words. I've been waiting. Until one day, I heard the bad news. I've been waiting for that unexpected person too. In the video, Fricka, the god King Odin, with a patch on his right eye, knelt on the ground and embraced Fricka's body. In his old eyes, one can see a heartbroken expression. The ground is covered with petals of various colors. In the Asgard temple, inside the hall, the queen's coffin was laid out, a scarf covered his face, flowing hair, light makeup on his cheeks, lipstick. The mother's face was still lifelike, but now she looked as if she was asleep, lying on the vulture. Wearing Valkyrie armor, she has a war blade on her chest. The expression is so peaceful. But Loki in the cage was still just reading the book calmly, he had no idea what was going on. Are there any special events today? He said casually when he saw the guards moving around outside. The queen, Fricka, has passed away. An old guard in golden armor, looked at Loki from outside the cage. This look, it's like watching a child. Loki was struck by lightning. He stopped reading and looked outside in disbelief. The Dark Elf King led the Dark Elves to attack Asgard from the secret passage. The guard sighed, the queen swore to protect the secret of TIE particles, but she was killed in the end. After hesitating for a moment, the guard just said, my condolences. Then, he turned around and left without any hesitation. Bah! Loki, who was imprisoned in the cage, dropped the book in his hand to the ground, and his expression became unbelievable. The moment before, he thought it was just a joke. At least in his heart, he completely denied the claim that his mother had passed away. But, the next moment, the tears in his eyes could no longer be stopped from falling. Tears burst forth, he broke down. No. Mother won't die, she can't die, it's impossible. You must be lying to me, yes, you must be lying to me, it was just a joke. No matter how much his tears flowed, he still kept a smile on his face, hoping that it was just a joke. Just like him, the mother was just angry and didn't want to see him, so she played a joke on him. It's like he's the god of trickery, the most powerful being in all of Asgard magic. He inherited his mother's magic, just like his previous pranks, how he hoped that these words were also a prank. No. Loki roared, he looked at the cage in front of him, but he knew, all of this is true, and his mother has really left him. He clenched his fists and pounded them hard on the cage around his eyes. Bang! Huge amounts of power caused ripples in the cage in front of him, but the cage made of energy was not something he could break. At this moment, no. Let me out. Let me out. At this moment, Loki completely collapsed. He roared and punched the cage of his eyes repeatedly. He wanted to go out, he wanted to see his mother, even if it was just to send her off for the last time. He also didn't want to be trapped in this damn cage in front of him. He had never felt so angry before, never hated the cage in front of him so much. This cage restricts his freedom. Loki finally collapsed, he fell to the ground, he looked at the book, at everything around him. Here, his mother's former shadow appeared. This was the place where he spoke to his mother for the last time. He seemed to be able to feel his mother's presence beside him. But my mother passed away. She can't come anymore. No, no. Loki collapsed, leaning against the wall, curling his legs together and hugging his knees tightly. He burst into tears, he thought of the last time he and his mother said goodbye, and how he said those treasonous words out of childishness. He thought of his mother's disappointment. He wanted to wait for his mother to come, explain in person that it was not his intention, and admit his mistake to her in person. But at this moment, he just wanted to tear his damn self-esteem to pieces with his own hands, because, that farewell became a farewell forever, he could no longer see his mother. He couldn't even apologize to his mother, he never got the chance. At this moment, he completely broke down. He couldn't even send his mother off for the last time. He couldn't even be there to see him off for the last time. At this moment, he hated his own naivety, he hated what he had done, he hated being locked up here, and this hatred temporarily suppressed the anger towards Odin. Chapter 12. Asgard. Seeing Loki's collapse in the video, Queen Fricka could no longer hold back. That look of self-blame is simply heartbreaking. Helplessly leaning against the wall, hugging my knees, he smashed his fists hard on the barrier, even if his fists broke and were bleeding. He overturned all the chairs and tables in the cage, and even ignored it even though his favorite book fell to the ground. He was roaring, he was angry, he was venting himself, his disappointment and regret towards himself. At this moment, Loki completely turned into a wounded little beast. He couldn't even attend his mother's funeral. Loki. Queen Fricka whispered the name and placed her hand on her heart. My child, even if something like this happened, your mother never blamed you. Although, Loki couldn't stop, but at this moment, he wants to tell Loki himself. This time, when Loki comes back, if he doesn't realize his mistakes, then she would respect Odin's actions, but would spend more time with the child in the cage. And then there is Thor. She was very worried about the damage that would be done to the two children's hearts if they saw such images. She is also worried. If Odin knew that she was going to die when he woke up, how angry would he be? Because Odin's heartbroken look in the video is so heartbreaking. The first generation of time management. Looking at himself in the video, Loki smiled, but tears still couldn't stop dripping from his eyes. He realized it again, that feeling called heartbreak, his mother died right in front of his eyes. Although he had never experienced such an incident, he had never experienced falling to the ground. He just deviated and came to a place outside the timeline. But, this feeling broke his heart every time. That is his beloved mother, but, at this moment, The smile on his pursed lips showed that he was truly relieved and accepted the result. And after going through countless hardships, watching the video in front of me, I finally woke up. He seemed to know what he was going to do, but looking at everything around him, his eyes were full of reluctance. Mobius. He looked at his companion beside him. Ah. Mobius, who came from another world, was just an ordinary man. Although he accepted the setting of the sacred timeline and the Time Management Bureau in a short period of time. But, he is just an ordinary person and he doesn't understand the meaning of the video in front of him. Loki, what are you going to do? Administrator Victor looked over. As an administrator, he knows a lot of things, such as the sacred timeline, the Divine Witness timeline branch. If an unimaginable disaster occurs in the future, Loki in front of him probably only has that one choice. I know what to do. Loki nodded slightly, but his eyes were much firmer. Time Management Bureau. Loki. Sylvie said the name for the second time. In the original timeline, she should have died in Ragnarok, but due to an accident she fell to the edge of time. She is the second princess of Asgard. However, from childhood to adulthood, I have always lived at the end of time, always living in timelines that are about to be destroyed. From childhood to adulthood, if everything is true, I am afraid I will also experience such pain. Sylvie whispered softly. She also thought of her mother, her father, the king, and his brother Thor in his own timeline. She couldn't imagine how painful it would be if her mother died in front of her. She was imprisoned. I couldn't even attend my mother's funeral. How desperate that would make her. At this moment, I understand why Loki often has sadness in his eyes. I finally understood why Loki was so gentle to everyone. Especially to her, holding her in the palm of his hand, that kind of. Be careful. Camartage. Doctor Strange sitting in the Supreme Temple, Stephen. At this moment, countless phantoms appeared around him, as if his entire body was peeled off from the entire world, creating countless illusions. The magic robe on his back was lifted high, bearing the huge force of magic at this moment. Finally, after countless evolutions, Doctor Strange finally opened his eyes. Loki's timeline. He seemed to understand everything and knew what the video in front of him was saying. After developing magic to its full potential, you can explore the wall of the world and discover that there are other worlds besides the one in front of you. Time is the only thing that can measure the world. Only time is the only unchanging and ever-moving existence. Every character will gradually disappear over time, and then disappear completely, but, precisely because of such rules, each world has its own rules of development. This video undoubtedly breaks this rule. Perform anchor point analysis on the video in front of you, and you can even feel the flashing of anchor points in other worlds. This video, it is not just played on this timeline in front of us, nor is it just played in this world in front of us. It even time travel through different worlds. Now, I just share Loki's story. That. Is there another story like this? In the video, finally, a figure wearing a cloak appeared in front of the cage. A head of fine blonde hair. Loki. Gently opening his mouth, a deep voice came out. Obviously it was Thor. But Loki in the cage is still bright and radiant, as if the decadent Loki before was just an illusion. Looking at Thor in front of him at this moment. He was just about to speak. Thor on the other side raised his hand to interrupt. You are not going to show your true self. In his opinion, he had been tricked countless times and had turned into Loki, so it must be just an illusion. Really? After he finished speaking, Loki in the illusion turned into a green light and disappeared, revealing the real situation in the cage. Before, I had jet black hair. His slicked back hair looked very handsome, but now it was messy and disheveled, and his face was pale. His expression was filled with exhaustion and even despair. The clothes were filthy and the ground was covered with blood. Loki's hands were covered in blood. The cage that had seemed smooth before was now in a mess, with pages of books scattered all over the floor. Even the tables and chairs were torn into pieces. Loki collapsed, and he released his stress and anger on these boneless tables, chairs, and benches. The whole person looks so powerless. This is no longer the dignified second prince of Asgard. Looks like a beggar. Chapter 13. Outside the video. Seeing this scene, many people couldn't help but exclaim. Is this still the Loki who is full of vigor and looks so handsome? Asgard. Loki. At this moment, Queen Fricka felt even more distressed. Compared to the decadent Loki in front of her who seemed to be losing his life, she would rather have the quirky Loki who used magic to do funny things. She thought of. Because her death could have had huge amounts of impact on Loki, but she was unexpectedly killed. It actually caused such a horrible impact on Loki. This is nothing less than spiritual destruction. Fortunately, it's fast. I need you, Loki. Looking at Loki in the cage in front of him, Thor said with a serious expression. Loki's tone was full of powerlessness. What can I do now? He looked into Thor's eyes. He had been fighting for something since he was a child, fighting for the love of his mother and father. Fighting for glory, fighting for the recognition of others, but fighting for so long. He is so miserable, he is locked in this cage, he couldn't even attend the funeral of his beloved mother. At this moment, he hated everything about himself. If he admitted his mistakes in front of Odin, if that day I didn't say anything that would hurt my mother. Maybe, today he can see his mother and have the final honor of attending her funeral. I can say to my mother in person, sorry. I know, you know there is a passage that can enter Asgard without being discovered, and now I need to leave Asgard. Thor pleaded earnestly, looking at the decadent Loki in front of him. He also had some pain in his eyes, but the most important thing at the moment was to leave Asgard. Only by sneaking out of Asgard can we save Asgard. Loki was silent. He just looked at Thor in front of him with his hair disheveled. He didn't want to answer this question because he had figured it out that day. It was the so-called channel that killed his mother. If it weren't for jealousy, if it weren't for greed, if it weren't for the desire to gain the approval of my father and mother, why would he do something so stupid? He wished none of this had ever happened. At this moment, he has completely lost his temper. He has given up everything. He doesn't even want to fight for the so-called recognition anymore, nor does he want to compete with Thor for the so-called glory anymore. Even if Thor is the future king of Asgard, so what? Mother, you will never come back. But I didn't think, if you can help me escape from Asgard, I will grant you the right to avenge my mother. Thor finally spoke. He looked deeply at his brother. The mother loved both of them equally, and even gave more love to the younger brother, which sometimes made him particularly envious. At this moment, this decadent Loki is the best expression of his love for his mother, so, in his heart, he had actually forgiven this brother in front of him, and forgiven his childishness. At this moment, Loki, who was depressed just now, finally had light in his eyes at this moment. He subconsciously retracted his outstretched legs, even though his clothes were tattered and his body was covered in blood. He still stood up tremblingly. Real. He looked at Thor in front of him and asked solemnly, at this moment, nothing is more important than the issue at hand. Yes. Saul nodded. As a rough man, he didn't know what was going on in Loki's heart at the moment, but at least this was a good reason to make Loki stand up. This time, good. Loki no longer hesitated, and his mother was killed by the Dark Elf King. There's no way he'll let these guys go. Even when being punished by his father, he used his last chance, revenge. So at this moment he agreed to Thor's request. Turning my head. Loki, I put on my clothes again. The disheveled Loki disappeared. At this moment, he was full of energy again, and at this moment he was completely supported by one belief, that is, to avenge his mother. This time, he needs to follow Thor's army and leave Asgard together. He needs to follow Thor to seek revenge. But I didn't think, the team that just came to Seoul, Buzz. A sharp blade was already in front of his neck. Thor's warrior, Fur, looked alert. If you betray everyone, I will definitely kill you. This sharp blade flashes with cold light, putting it in front of Loki's neck. The female warrior in front of him could cut Loki's throat with just a little force. If it were the old Loki, he would definitely be gloomy at this moment, but under the gaze of everyone, Loki smiled gently and said, good. At this moment, Loki it seems to become a stranger, it seems to be different from before, but, in the video, no one welcomes Loki to join the team, including Thor's good friends and his warriors. Everyone is hostile to Loki. Even Thor's gaze seemed to be the same. At this moment, although he felt alienated by everyone, Loki, who joined the team, always had a smile on his face. Finally, after some hardships, Loki and Thor took Jane Foster and left Asgard. And soon, the Dark Elves actually tracked them down. They came very quickly and a new battle quickly broke out. No one expected that just then. There are countless TIE particles scattered on the ground. The Dark Elf King arrived and looked at the countless TIE particles on the ground. He stretched out his hands. The etiquette particles scattered on the ground actually responded one after another. Then it drilled into the body of the Dark Elf King. After taking a look at the Dark Elf beside him, the Dark Giant gained a safe form and turned away. The Dark Elves were left behind, facing Thor, and rushed over. Buzz. Looking at the Dark Elves coming at him aggressively, Thor immediately tightened his grip on the hammer in his hand. Bang, bang, bang. These Dark Elf soldiers were completely helpless, and the powerful Thor was knocked away by the hammer one by one. But no one expected that just then. The Dark Elf King who had just left, picked up a black hole bomb and activated it, and suddenly shot it towards Jane Foster threw it over. Loki panicked and looked at Jane Foster beside him. He suddenly stretched out his hand and pushed Jane Foster away. But I didn't think, crash. The bomb instantly formed a black hole in the air, and the black hole's terrifying gravitational pull pulled on the surrounding ground, the debris of rocks flew into the air like a black hole. Crash. All objects touched by the black hole were crushed into slag and disappeared completely. Even Loki himself could not escape the gravitational pull and fell into the black hole. At this moment, the situation is extremely critical. Chapter 14. Time Management Bureau. Seeing this scene, Sylvie's heart tightened and she subconsciously clenched her fists. The video in front of me gives everyone an immersive feeling, the kind of complete substitution. It was as if the black hole appeared right before his eyes. That tangible feeling seemed to make everyone feel Loki's urgency, and, from the decadence after losing his mother to this moment, he seemed to have undergone some transformation. Seems to have grown a lot. He once took the initiative to provoke the war, causing countless lives to die, and he never repented, but at this moment he was able to take the initiative to push Jane Foster away. Loki, he become more acceptable. Earth. S.H.I.E.L.D. The aircraft carrier dropped from the sky, and everyone has returned to New York. The previous war came to an end. And then, in the original setting, Loki needs to be handed over to the war court, but because of the appearance of Thor, Loki needs to be taken back to Asgard. But this does not affect everyone watching the video in front of them. Stark Building. Is that a black hole? Dr. Banner looked at the black bloody mouth in the video. It devoured all the matter around it, and even the stone debris on the ground was crushed into slag the moment it touched it. He was completely stunned. You can create a black hole with ease. Wow! Awesome! In theory, it's not impossible, but it's quite dangerous. The Iron Man next to him folded his arms, very naturally, and took out a bottle of wine from the cabinet. With a snap, he opened the cork, picked up the wine glass next to him, poured himself a glass, and took a sip. He said casually, "Jarvis. Here I am." Jarvis' voice sounded. "Project the video from outside in. I want to watch it here." Iron Man said casually. After saying that, he came to the sofa holding the wine glass and carrying the wine bottle. After the battle, everyone took a short break, and naturally, we took everyone back to Stark Tower. Include Thor, wearing a red cape and full armor. He looks different from the guy fighting in the video. He seems to be a little stronger than you. Tony joked. Thor was speechless, but soon he found the wine in the cabinet next to him. He stood up with great interest and took out new wine from the cabinet next to him. Hey. Tony was about to speak. Pa. Soul has opened, well, I want to say, that's not bad. Tony was a little speechless. But, actually it's not a problem. He has already made preparations for everyone coming to his house. All he has in front of him are some drinks. Captain America lay on his back on the sofa, watching the video of the eyes, and he thought for a moment, Loki seems to have really changed. However, it seems to be different from the timeline in front of us. In the future. Hawkeye nodded. That's right. Black Widow also changed her sitting position and crossed her legs. The tights uniform perfectly accentuated her figure. With a click, he opened his lighter, took out a lady's cigarette and took a light puff. In the video. Sudden, swoosh. A figure wearing a red windbreaker quickly flew over from a distance and hugged Loki at an extremely fast speed. Finally, the two people fell to the ground in the distance at the same time. Looking at Thor beside him, Loki was filled with disbelief. Thor didn't say anything, he stood up immediately. Crash! The black hole above my head only existed for a short time and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The entire ground looked dark and different. Here. It is the lair of the dark elves. The sky is covered with dark clouds, blocking the sun and leaving only a little golden light. In the distance, the army of dark elves was preparing to board ships and head to other universes. Seeing this situation, sniff sniff. Thor swung the hammer in his hand quickly, and his body was quickly carried away and flew far away. Bang! The hammer hit the dark elf army hard, but they didn't expect that bang. A figure suddenly punched Thor, knocking him backwards from the air. He rolled to the ground in a mess. The dark elf king unexpectedly rushed over and punched Thor in the face several times. Bang! Thor was unable to defend himself, and his body was smashed into the air, drawing an arc in the sky. With a bang, it hit a pile of rocks in the distance. The dark elf's spaceship took off into the sky, and he was unable to stop it. Several dark elves also stepped forward, surrounding Loki with weapons in their hands. Loki only had a short sword in his hand, but he held the sword tightly with his right hand. Base. The battle was about to break out, and the dagger in his hand stabbed into the body of a dark elf. And here. The dark elf warrior fought with Thor, and Thor was no match for him. Although the two sides fought back and forth, the dark elf's casual punch was enough to knock Thor away. This dark elf was the one who invaded Asgard together with the Elf King. He is also the most powerful dark elf warrior left. Boom! Thor was hit hard on the back and embedded into the mountain wall. Seeing this, the dark elf trotted towards the giant rock next to him and punched it. Break the giant rocks, grab huge amounts of them with both hands, and throw them towards Thor. Thor held out his arms to block. Under the collision of his strong physique and the boulder was shattered and Thor was knocked to the ground. But he immediately stretched out his hands into the air. Whoosh! Thor's hammer flew out, coming towards him with the force of thunder, hitting the dark elf's back. But, bang! The dark elf knocked Thor's hammer away with just a casual punch. And he walked towards Thor step by step without mercy, with a strong sense of oppression and a strong figure. At this moment, Thor's pressure increased dramatically. The other side. Loki was on a killing spree. At this moment, he no longer looked like a mage, but rather like a melee assassin. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Ordinary dark elves were no match for him. The dagger in his hand flew up and down, easily killing these dark elves. But suddenly found out, on Thor's side. Crisis situation. Without any hesitation, he walked towards Thor on the other side. Bang, bang, bang. In the video, Thor was beaten without any resistance at this moment, and was hit on the face by the dark elf's hands. There were multiple injuries on his face, and he couldn't even stand up, but, just then. Base. The sharp blade pierced directly through the dark elf's back. Thor was stunned, and the dark elf warrior was also stunned and turned his head to look. At this moment, in the video, the head of the dark communication warrior is given a close-up. Sharp fangs growing from the head, sharp fangs growing from the cheeks, a look like a skull, and a face like crocodile skin, with dense wrinkles, that pair of bloodthirsty pain. He suddenly hugged Loki and then pulled him back into his arms. Base. The dagger that pierced Loki's chest pierced into his body and came out from his back. Ah! Loki didn't react at all and cried out in pain. Seeing this scene, Thor struggled to get up and roared, "No!" Chapter 15. At this moment, Loki was stabbed to the core. Afterwards, bah! The dark elf pulled it off his body and threw it on the ground like trash. With a plop, Loki clutched his wound tightly. Bang, bang, bang. The dark elf walked over with the blade on his body. It was obviously a blade. Even though it pierced his body, it didn't cause much damage. Ah! At this moment, Loki was breathing heavily, as if he was in unbearable pain. He looked up at the dark elf. Angry, "See you in hell, monster." The dark elf suddenly lowered his head and looked at his waist. He didn't know when the black hole annihilation bomb appeared on his waist. He was about to reach out and take it off, boom. A bomb. It exploded directly, and countless fiery red lights completely enveloped his body. Ah! A breath of dignity burst out instantly under the power of the bomb, and the fiery red light madly crushed the monster's whole body. Gaba! All the bones in the monster's body seemed to be crushed. Under the aura of destruction, its body broke into pieces and disappeared in an instant. Thor finally managed to get up with one breath, and he jogged to Loki's side. At this time, Loki's body seemed to have an imbalance in temperature, and his entire body turned blue, which was completely different from his previous skin. Just lying on the ground, breathing in the air, but the power of breathing has become very weak. No, no, no. Looking at Loki in front of him, Thor was almost scared to death. He reached out to help Loki up and wanted to hold him in his arms. But Loki's body was as cold as ice. "You are so stupid, why don't you listen to me?" Thor said in panic. But Loki, however, was much calmer. His eyes were weak and his cheeks were as blue as the skin of the giants of Jotunheim. He said helplessly, "I know, I'm so stupid, I'm so stupid." His lips trembled, as if he could only repeat this sentence. So he became even more panicked, and reached out to touch Loki's face. Hold on, now, he could also see that Loki seemed to be having a last burst of energy and this was his final struggle. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Loki apologized eagerly. This apology is full of profound meaning. At this moment, in his eyes, Thor in front of him was like his brother. It's okay, it's okay." Thor finally calmed down a bit. Looking down at Loki in his arms, he said with a fair expression, "I will report your bravery to my father." He looked serious and nodded earnestly. But even at the last moment of his life, Loki was calmer. "I'm not doing this for him." And this sentence, as if it also carries all the explanations. Looking at Loki in front of him, Thor was at a loss as to what to do. But Loki gently closed his eyes, his body turned blue, and countless spots covered his body. Completely lost the temperature. "He is dead." "No." Thor roared, he roared and trembled all over. He knew that his brother had also left him. At this moment, Loki is dead. Maguire Spider-Man World. Peter felt that the biscuit in his hand was no longer fragrant. He casually put down the biscuit he had just picked up and watched the video in front of him. For a moment I didn't know what to say, but I only felt a little bit grief. Although he experienced many life and death separations, however, after going through a lot of things, he also figured out a lot of things. The child who loved to play pranks eventually grew up, even though he was childish once. Even though a huge mistake was made in the past. But after his mother's death, he still grew up. Even at the last moment, he learned to protect others, he learned to protect his brother. But he died too. Peter felt a little regretful. Garfield Spider-Man World. His figure kept wandering in the city, and the spider silk launcher kept spraying spider silk. He was like on patrol, inspecting every corner of the city. In a short period of time, this video seemed to appear out of thin air, and quickly appeared in many places. They are all Loki, and they play synchronously. Although there was no harm, he found that almost everyone was paying attention to this phenomenon. This is a bit abnormal. Swoosh. His body stood firmly on the top of a building and took a look at the tragic ending. At this moment, he thought of the girl he had failed to save. But at this moment, I just felt sorry in my heart and said, pity. Swoosh. The spider silk shooter sprays spider silk. His figure immediately swam to a new place. He needed to ensure that the security issues in the city have been addressed through the emergence of videos and the protection forces in the city. There will definitely be some slackness. There is a high possibility of danger. Asgard. No. Queen Fricka spoke. She stood up. No one can accept the death of their mother. No one can accept their own child dying in front of their eyes. The same is true for her. At this moment, Queen Fricka could no longer stop crying. No matter how elegant he looked, he cried like crazy. As for the others, they didn't know how to persuade him for a moment, but they also recognized Loki. Heimdall was even more emotional. He has grown up. Time Management Bureau. Sylvie's tears fell, but she quickly wiped them away. Because in her opinion, only the weak need tears. But this time, no matter how hard I try, I can't wipe away my tears, and I can't stop them from falling. You haven't avenged your mother yet. Loki. Sylvie whispered. Sudden, sniff sniff. A special piercing sound came from beside me. Soon, Loki's figure reappeared in the space before him. Loki. B15 was the first to say in surprise. Loki. Administrator Victor also spoke up. However, the first administrator Victor looked much younger, while the Victor in front of him seemed much older. Loki. Sylvie couldn't help herself and rushed out to hug Loki. Loki, who had just returned to this time period, looked at the people around him in confusion. However, he still reached out and hugged Sylvie in his arms. Chapter 16. Loki's death was so sudden. Even though he is a villain. However, at the moment of awakening, perhaps everyone no longer hated him so much. He is more like a kid who likes to play pranks. A child who never grows up. But when you grow up, everything seems to be too late. But, just when everyone was immersed in this grief, an Asgard soldier came to the battlefield, wearing a golden helmet and looking very similar to Thor. He patrolled the battlefield with a steel fork in his hand. But at this moment, base. A sharp blade pierced his heart and passed through the golden armor. Well. The soldier fell to the ground uncontrollably. Sudden. Loki, who was supposed to be dead, stood up. Although he covered his chest with his hands, it was obvious that he was only seriously injured, but not dead. Looking at the soldiers on the ground, countless green magics enveloped him, and he quickly transformed into the appearance of a soldier. He picked up the soldier's steel fork and turned away. The dead soldiers on the ground turned into Loki's appearance in a burst of green magic. This scene. It looks like a complete bombshell. Asgard. She was crying so hard that Queen Fricka accidentally looked up and saw this scene, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. But obviously, Loki still doesn't understand the importance of life and takes a life casually. Bai was touched by him. Fu rolled her eyes. Loki. Ouch. Heimdall couldn't help but shake his head slightly, it looked like this kid hadn't grown up at all. Time Management Bureau. Seeing this, Sylvie pushed Loki away. Feeling the gazes of everyone around her, she couldn't help but cover her face with her hands. A bit embarrassing. Loki smiled bitterly, that wasn't done by me, it was done by Loki in that timeline. I don't care, it's still you. Sylvie snorted and turned her head away. The land of nothingness. Oh. Leader Loki cheered, as expected of me, I was able to deceive a lot of tears this time, and it seems that everyone believed it, and then returned to Asgard to do some weird things. Loki. Viking Loki, holding his axe high in his hand. Even the crocodile Loki couldn't help but lick the corner of his mouth when he saw this scene. The child Loki didn't care, he just shook his head and curled his lips. In his opinion, this was simply too boring, and the scene of saving people just now was too boring, it would be better to do some practical jokes. Just like this. It was obvious that all the Loki variants present approved of Loki's deceitful behavior. Video continues. Loki, transformed into a soldier, returned to Asgard. Obviously, he looked uncomfortable and a little uneasy. This was Odin's direct soldier. Need to answer report. He walked into the temple with a nervous heart. In front of him was the king of gods, Odin, sitting on the throne. Loki took a deep breath, imagined the appearance of the soldiers before, knelt on one knee and said respectfully, "My king, I have found out that Loki has lost his voice. He has died." There was no flaw in the logic, just like the soldiers before. Odin, who was sitting on the throne, was silent at this moment. It was not until a moment later that he nodded, "Take back Loki's body. His soul will exist in Valhalla. Eternal immortality." Yes. The warrior Loki played nodded slightly. At this moment, he completely relaxed, for not even Odin could see through his magical disguise. Until, he turned and left, completely leaving the hall, and only then did he completely relax. And then, the day was ordinary. Loki, as an ordinary soldier, patrolled the surrounding area. His taciturn personality also helped him quickly blend into the group of soldiers. A person who doesn't like to talk is least likely to be exposed. But, everyone in front of the video can see clearly that Loki is obviously planning something, finally, just as Odin fell asleep again and woke up. This was his weakest moment. The loyal soldier actually cast a spell behind him, and the green magic enveloped Odin. Well. Odin was so weak that he didn't react for a while before he was hit. His expression became dull and he closed his eyes again. Falling asleep again. This time he didn't look like he was sleeping, he looked very peaceful. Asgard. Queen Fricka was very nervous when she saw this scene, because she knew too well how harsh Odin was in Loki's heart. It seems that it caused him deep harm. Moreover, he had been imprisoned before. Even, Loki was not even allowed to attend his mother's funeral. So, at this moment she was really scared, this child would kill his father. Earth. Stark building. Loki. When Thor saw this scene, he couldn't help but groan. Crunch. The cup in his right hand clenched into a fist, and with a snap, it exploded into pieces and scattered everywhere. Even, at this moment, he stood up nervously. The land of nothingness. All the Loki looked at the scene in front of them, holding their breath. It's not because of how glorious the current behavior is, everyone has their own Asgard, and the Loki in front of him belongs to another timeline. What is he going to do? Obviously, all the variants don't want Loki in front of them to commit suicide. Fortunately. In the video. My dear father, from today on, you will lose all your glory and live in a daze until you get rid of my magic. Loki leaned over to Odin's ear and said calmly, this voice seemed very mysterious, and his face was full of indifference. And he, turn around. Green magic enveloped his entire body, and the soldiers disappeared. Loki's figure disappeared again, and he appeared in front of everyone. It turned out to be the god King Odin. He transformed into the appearance of Odin. Chapter 17. Earth. S.H.I.E.L.D. Oh. Watching what he did in the video, Loki was completely stunned. He couldn't believe that he had done this with his own hands. He actually, using trickery, he transformed into Odin's appearance. Seeing this scene, Loki was so happy, but Odin's actions made him angry. But, no matter what time it is, he is still Odin's child, even if Odin has a deep prejudice against him, even if Odin imprisoned him, he never hated Odin, but, he was imprisoned and could not attend his mother's funeral. There is no way he would let Odin have an easy time. Starry Sky. Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh. Rocket Raccoon put down the wine glass in his hand, his mouth turned into an O shape, and his face was full of shock. Gamera curled her lips, looking speechless, it's just a child's trick. But his magic seems to be really powerful. Ha 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 ha. The destroyer stretched out his hand, patted his chest and laughed loudly, revenge, what a pleasure. Groot. Next to the gentle tree Groot, he smiled kindly at everyone in front of him. He was the oldest among them all. Okay, everyone. Sometimes I feel a little speechless, but this kid did the right thing. At least he didn't kill Odin. Star-Lord nodded in approval. He picked up the wine glass next to him, put the wooden cup to his lips and gulped it down. It hasn't been long since the Guardians of the Galaxy were established. But, this group will definitely attract a lot of attention in the future, and will at least become stars in the entire, oh no, half of the universe. Asgard. Call. Queen Fricka breathed a sigh of relief. Although what Loki did was not a good thing either, instead of killing Odin, Loki just exiled Odin. When Queen Fricka thought that he didn't even have the right to attend his mother's funeral, she felt a little heartbroken. There is nothing wrong with being able to do so. But, also wrong. She sighed, alas, education is still necessary. The others looked at Queen Fricka and didn't know what to say for a moment. Say Loki is bad, he doesn't seem to be that bad, just doing some mischievous things. Oh, to kill a soldier and disregard life. But at the most critical moment, he saved Thor's girlfriend and almost died himself. Moreover, he staged that tender scene, making everyone think that he was completely dead. Say good things about him. He has done so many wrong things again, and it looks like he's going to exile Odin. Why? Everyone couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. Fortunately, the god King Odin had fallen into a deep sleep at this time. If he was still on the throne and saw this scene, he would definitely be so angry that he would jump to his feet. And then, he transformed into Odin's appearance, and the first thing he did was to expel Heimdall from Asgard. He sat on the throne, holding the scepter that symbolized Odin's identity, and wearing the armor of the god Odin. That gaze that looked down upon all living things, indifferent and indifferent. Even Heimdall, who is the most powerful warrior in Asgard, cannot disobey this order. After being dragged with his armor, he was teleported out of Asgard in a daze. Then, using the power of the rainbow ball, Odin was teleported directly to Midgard. That is the Earth. Standing on the rainbow bridge, looking at the teleport Odin still sleeping, Loki stretched out his hand and said, "Goodbye, father." This moment is extremely funny. Soon, the first thing he did, it turned out to be the expulsion of the Valkyrie. Sitting on the throne, even if the Valkyrie is angry, it will be of no use. Loki obviously holds a grudge. Moreover, he was really afraid that this smart girl like Fu would recognize him. He chose a new guardian, Skorki, who holds the key to activate the Rainbow Bridge, an extremely broad sword. Afterwards, in the name of training, he directly persuaded Thor to leave Asgard, but Skorch's real duty is to inform Thor in time when he returns to Asgard. And soon, he built a statue of himself in Asgard. Even in the biography, directly made Nakasu into a hero. Next, Asgard prospers, but the god King Odin seemed a little strange. He actually liked some of the dramas on Earth, and he arranged them. It turned out to be the scene where he sacrificed himself in the battle on the Dark Planet. He was enjoying himself to the fullest at this moment. The power and joy that comes with being a king. Time flies. 4 years later. Suddenly one day, a figure wearing golden armor flew back directly from outside the Rainbow Bridge. His blonde hair fell to the ground, his strong face looked like he had been through a lot, and his face was covered with stubble. With a furious look on his face, he came to where Odin was without hesitation. Thor. Loki, pretending to be Odin, was about to speak. Just then, an angry Thor rushed forward, grabbed Odin's clothes, and pulled him up from the chair. Oh! The people around were all shocked. And this is just like the previous scene, Thor threw the hammer in his hand directly, he grabbed Odin's clothes and placed him in front of him. He said coldly, after 10 seconds, the hammer will automatically fly back. If you still choose to deceive others, you will die. As everyone was looking on in shock, when the countdown reached 4 seconds, they could already see the hammer flying back rapidly from a distance. Crash! Under the green magical light, Loki revealed its true appearance. Thor also pushed Loki away. Looking at Loki in front of him, Thor kept asking, "Where is he? Where is my father? I have no idea." Loki, who was naturally afraid of his brother, could only back away subconsciously, but he still maintained a stubborn attitude. Seeing that he couldn't get anything out of him, Thor simply pushed Loki down and placed his hammer on his chest. At this moment, Loki was like a turtle, unable to stand up or push away the hammer on his chest. Just lying on the ground, looking helpless and pitiful for a moment. Ah! No matter how hard he gritted his teeth, he couldn't push the hammer away from his body. At this moment, he had become a lamb to be slaughtered. Finally, Loki couldn't bear it any longer, he said quickly, "Earth, Earth." Chapter 18. Soon, in the video, Doctor Strange appeared, and the temple where he was. The beer in Thor's hand seemed to never finish. As Doctor Strange's magic continued to shake him, he became more and more dizzy. Finally, after knocking down a very sophisticated small tower, Doctor Strange found Odin. And Thor, you smashed the entire temple to pieces while summoning your hammer. And at this moment, everyone then remembered the once forgotten Loki. Oh, yes. Doctor Strange suddenly realized and stretched out his hand to create a magic circle above his head. Ah! Screams continued to be heard from it. Finally, with a bang, Loki just fell from the sky to the ground, and I don't know if his nose was flattened. I was in free fall for 2 days. At this moment, Loki couldn't help but complain, his face turned red. Asgard. Ha 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 ha. Countless people saw this scene and almost burst out laughing. Free fall for 2 days. It never stops at all. The psychological gap was too big, and I was in free fall for 2 whole days. It was unimaginable and extremely funny. Guardians of the Galaxy. Everyone was silent for 2 seconds. Then, ha 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 ha. No one could hold back their laughter. This guy was a bit hysterical and neither a good person nor a bad person. But I didn't expect to be treated like this by Doctor Strange. Camartage. Hearing Loki's words, Doctor Strange subconsciously raised a smile. In his opinion, this must have been intentional, at least on the surface it seemed like he had forgotten. And, Loki's behavior. In fact, in the true sense, it means exiling one's father, driving out one's brother, and even hurting one's own people. This. It is no longer an existence that can be defined as a good person. Time Management Bureau. Everyone looked around. Loki had a strange expression on his face. Hey, that's not me. I haven't experienced this yet. Loki quickly waved his hands in surrender. Sylvie rolled her eyes. Idiot. Looking at his silly appearance in the video, Loki was confused. But, soon, under the magic of Doctor Strange, the two finally found the exiled Odin. At this time, Odin had silver hair, a pale face, an eye patch on his right eye, and the clothes he wore looked shabby. Just like picking up junk. His eyes also changed from the previous clearness, it became turbid. Without the majestic armor, he looked like a frail old man at this moment. The three of them sat by the sea, enjoying the majestic scenery. Loki felt a little uncomfortable in his suit. In fact, it took me many years to get rid of your magic. Odin finally spoke, his eyes looking into the distance. Seemingly casual words, but at this moment, he was talking to Loki beside him. Loki was silent. If it were in the past, Odin would definitely reprimand him severely, or even give him severe punishment. And he also looked down at the ground. Although he was not aware of his mistakes, thinking about the long exile, Odin, the once majestic god king, it has become what it is today. Maybe. Deep down, Loki has forgiven Odin. But I didn't expect that the next moment, Odin turned his head and looked at Loki beside him seriously. If your mother saw this, she would be proud of you, my child. One moment. Loki was completely stunned. This was a tone that Odin had never used before, and it was also something that he had never said to him, even from childhood to adulthood. He had never heard such encouragement. Is this still Odin? The father who was extremely strict in his impression, the one who always sided with Thor in all matters. Father. The father who imprisoned him and prevented him from attending his mother's funeral. Now, this sentence is a recognition of him. Perhaps, in the past 4 years, Odin has experienced a lot. His face is full of vicissitudes. Loki couldn't hold it in any longer and said, Father. After some greetings. But I didn't expect that from Odin's words, he sensed the magic stirring in the dark. During the conversation between the three people, Odin also revealed a secret. Before Thor and Loki, they had a sister. Goddess of death, Hela. This Hela is too powerful, full of ambition, and can't help plundering and fighting. Final, sealed by Odin, but, now that he is old, the maple leaves have loosened, the magic in the darkness is stirring, and Hela is bound to make a comeback. Father. Thor looked worried. Why? Odin sighed and said, what happens next is up to you, and I am powerless to stop you. Under the gaze of Thor and Loki, Odin stood up. His figure turned into light and flew away. I love you, kids. Last look, after taking a deep look at the two children, he disappeared from sight. That glance was an affirmation of the two children. Loki was stunned. Odin. Not only did he express his recognition of him, but at this moment, he finally treated him and Thor in an equal tone for the first time. This is the family love that his former mother, Fricka, wanted him to feel. But I didn't think, just then. Unknown magic suddenly descended in the distance, and a girl with long green hair appeared, her graceful figure, elder sister. Thor had an awkward smile on his face. After all, they had never met the woman in front of them, but she was still their sister after all. But I didn't think, take me back to Asgard. Hela grinned, clothes hangers kept appearing on her body, she reached out to touch her long green hair, and a helmet she had worn in battle appeared. Crash! With a move of her hands, 2 sharp blades appeared in her hands. She said coldly, otherwise, die. Looking at Hela who was approaching step by step, Loki and Thor looked at each other. Buzz! Thor immediately clenched the hammer in his hand. And Loki, swoosh! He moved his hands and swung them to both sides in the same motion, and the dagger appeared in his hands. At this moment, this is what it means to truly fight side by side. After a battle, both of them were tortured to death by Hela and had no chance to fight back. Finally, buzz! Thor no longer hesitated, swung the Thor's hammer in his hand, and threw it towards Hela. Buzz! Thor's hammer flew towards Hela with the force of thunder. Oh! Hela smiled faintly and gently stretched out her right hand. The slender and tender right hand seemed to have infinite power at this moment. With a snap, grab Thor's hammer tightly. Loki's eyes changed drastically. This is Thor's hammer, which has a stellar-level core compressed inside and has been cast with a special magic spell by Odin. Hole! He actually caught it. This unimaginable power also shocked Thor. The next moment, pa! Hela clenched her fists suddenly, and saw Thor's hammer trembling wildly. The incomparably hard Thor's hammer. Kalala. The next moment, it was covered with cracks, and with a pop, it was crushed to pieces by Hela. Chapter 19. The ground was covered with pieces of Thor's hammer. At this moment, Thor was completely confused. Whole. Their sister was so powerful that she crushed Thor's hammer with her bare hands. This is horrible. It seems that you have already thought about death. Hela said disapprovingly. Just then. Without time to immerse himself in sadness, Thor looked up at the sky and immediately said angrily, "No." The next moment, boom. An extremely terrifying pressure attacked the ground from the sky. Within the unimaginable pressure was a special transmission channel. Rainbow Bridge. And this is currently under the control of Strange. This idiot. Loki cursed casually, but when he opened his eyes, he and Thor were already inside the Rainbow Bridge. Unexpectedly, here we go. Hela unexpectedly jumped into the transmission of the Rainbow Bridge automatically. Follow behind them, follow closely. No. Loki gritted his teeth, and the green light in his right hand once again appeared in the magic of the dagger. He threw the dagger out without hesitation. Stabbed Hela. But I didn't think, swoosh. Hela grabbed the dagger at a faster speed and threw it back. Loki was stabbed, his body lost control and fell directly onto the transmission channel next to him. One moment, pa! The transmission channel shattered directly, and Loki's figure was completely submerged. Only Thor's voice was left, Loki. The video takes a new turn, shocking everyone. Asgard. The whole. Queen Fricka's face changed drastically. She is not. Hela is Odin's first child. When he was young, he showed extraordinary talent, but his character was unruly. He showed great wisdom at a young age. After that, she followed Odin to fight on the battlefield and became known as the goddess of death in the 9 realms. She is bloodthirsty and murderous, and doesn't take life seriously at all. Even his ambitions expanded and he was ambitious, trying to unify the 9 realms, final, banished and sealed by Odin. Unexpectedly, will make a comeback in the future. Hey! Others looked shocked. He crushed Thor's hammer with his bare hands. This power is too terrifying. Even Loki can't resist Thor's hammer. She didn't just pick up Thor's hammer, she used her absolute power to directly fight against Thor's hammer. If Hela comes back, it will be a disaster beyond imagination. And with hatred in mind, he wants to destroy Asgard. At this moment, everyone panicked. Queen Fricka clenched her fists, but couldn't help but think of Loki and Thor. We can only place our hopes on these 2 children. After all, Odin at that time. It's really too weak. In the video, Hela returned to Asgard, with powerful force. One person actually killed the Asgard armed forces alone. Her terrifying fighting power is unimaginable. Ordinary warriors are simply no match for her. However, the cloak on her body can withstand artillery fire. The flying sword thrown casually directly destroyed the warship flying in the sky. The terrifying power was revealed at this moment. She killed people in the crowd, and she had no respect for life at all. Even if countless soldiers were dispatched, they couldn't cause any harm to her. And her physical strength seemed to be endless. She crushed the soldier to death with her bare hands as easily as crushing an ant. Even if you are injured, you can recover in a short time. Base. The sharp spear pierced his body directly, but the next moment, her body recovered as before. Anger burned in Hela's heart. Hela's strength was unimaginable. Even if the person in front of her is an Asgard warrior, she will kill him without any scruples. In a short time, on the square, the corpses of soldiers were already lying there. In the entire divine realm, its power is infinite, and it is still constantly absorbing power. Summon the weapon in your hand at will. Slaughtered in Hela, in a short time, the army in front of her was slaughtered. Base. Pulling out the common thing that was inserted into the soldier's body, she stuck out her tongue and licked the corner of her mouth, obviously still. There are still some unfinished business. Oh, I miss this feeling. Hela was shaking with excitement. She walked forward step by step, moving casually among the crowd of corpses. And at this moment, Strange, who holds the key to the Rainbow Bridge, arrives here. Looking at the corpses of the soldiers on the ground, some of them were even torn into pieces. This scene simply shocked him, he was speechless. Even, oh, look, he's still alive. Hela said casually without paying any attention to Strange beside her. Whoosh! She threw the sword in her hand. It was just a sharp dagger at first, but now it has turned into a sharp spear. Base! The captain of the Holy Lord was nailed to the ground. At this moment, her brutality is evident. This horrifying scene made it hard to imagine that anything else could defeat Hela. Camartage. So this is the goddess of death. Doctor Strange, looking at Hela in the video, his expression is solemn. That endless power, and the unimaginably strong self-healing ability. She can summon weapons at will, and her power seems to be growing as time goes by. Doctor Strange was silent. He couldn't imagine any way to kill Hela in front of him. As for Thor, the hammer has been crushed. Can he do it? Stark Tower. All the Avengers who were drinking also stopped, and they all turned their heads to look at Thor. At this moment, Thor stopped drinking and the hammer in his right hand suddenly fell to the ground. He picked up the hammer casually and looked at it in shock. She just crushed your hammer like that? Iron Man said in shock. Dr. Banner couldn't help but shook his head slightly, and it looks like it's just pure physical strength. Are all your Asgard warriors so perverted? How can we defeat her? How is it possible? Thor gritted his teeth and looked up at the video. If it weren't for this video, I'm afraid I wouldn't know about Hela's existence, and not every Asgard has such a strong physique. In Asgard, you will have unlimited physical strength, regenerative healing factor, and your magical power will also increase. This. He took a deep breath, not knowing how to answer the question at this moment. But I didn't think, Captain America, who had been silent all this time, suddenly touched his chin and said, her power comes from Asgard. Is it only by destroying Asgard that we can kill her? One moment. Everyone looked at Captain America. Wow, there's a living dad sitting here. And at the same time. Another world. Xavier Junior Academy. The Beast suddenly discovered that the instrument in front of him detected a special energy fluctuation. And, sniff sniff. This energy fluctuation became more and more, and in the blink of an eye it became dense and spread everywhere. Chapter 20. At the same time, Thor was accidentally thrown to the edge of the universe along with the cosmic garbage. At first glance, this place is like a cosmic garbage dump, with garbage all over the ground and smoke and dust everywhere. Looks very messy. It formed a sharp contrast with Thor, who was wearing armor and red robes. And soon, a group of scavengers dressed in strange clothes walked out of the portal. Just then, Thor habitually reached out and summoned Thor's hammer. But the next moment, she suddenly saw that her palms were empty. His face was filled with astonishment. Only then did he remember that his Thor's hammer had been crushed. Thor, who has long been accustomed to fighting with Thor's hammer. Soon, the scavengers on the other side aimed their high-tech guns at him. Before he could react. Swoosh! The energy binding net has tied up Thor, and his body is shaking slightly. Apparently, this net has a numb function. 1 hour. All the scavengers gathered here, looking down at the prey on the ground, and Thor seemed to be one of them. Like fish on a cutting board. The scavengers looked around, not knowing what to do. Some scavengers even raised their weapons, ready to shoot everyone in the head. But at this moment, in the distant sky, a high-tech fighter jet fell from the sky. The fighter plane opened, and a girl in armor with special markings on her face staggered out of the cabin with a bottle of wine in her hand. She threw away the bottle in her hand, looked at the ground, and said domineeringly, "He is mine." But I didn't expect that. Plop. As she walked, she actually reached the edge of the deck and dove into the garbage heap next to it like a drunk. This scene, it's hilarious. All the scavengers seemed to have black lines on their heads, but they didn't care and walked towards Thor again. But soon, Valkyrie stood up from the ground unharmed, walked slowly to the front of the scavengers, and raised his fists. There seemed to be nothing in his fists. But in the next moment, bang, bang, bang. The last fighter suddenly spewed out a thick tongue of fire. The dazzling blue lasers were fired like bullets, hitting the group of scavengers. The scavenger had no time to react and was directly smashed into pieces by the dazzling laser. The situation was extremely dire. There was no scavenger left on the field. Only Valkyrie was left standing. Wow, hello. Thor forcibly pulled off the binding net on his body, stood up, looked at the Valkyrie in front of him, and greeted him excitedly. But I didn't think. Looking at the Thor Valkyrie in front of him, he frowned slightly and threw the electrode in his hand. I don't know where to get a device from. The electrodes automatically stuck to all the skin, then penetrated into the skin and became completely embedded. La Valkyrie. I squeezed the motor button switch in my hand, and the energy was filled. Thor's body couldn't be controlled, and he immediately fell to the ground trembling and paralyzed. Asgard. Seeing this scene, everyone didn't know whether to say it was good or bad. The path of the goddess of death Hela is right before our eyes, so we will definitely not be spared. Thrown away like garbage, is this what the goddess of death does? I was already very good at using Thor's hammer when I was using it normally, but now that I lost it, it seems like I can no longer fight. Why? Heimdall sighed heavily. Once upon a time, he had already understood Odin's thoughts. But I didn't expect Thor, he is so dependent on Thor's hammer. Valkyrie. While others were still discussing the battle just now, Queen Fricka was already whispering. She recognized the identity of this Valkyrie. Because a generation of Valkyrie Legion was once led by her, but in the end there were heavy casualties. The Valkyrie army was almost wiped out, but the goddess of death was unscathed. Valkyrie, a powerful warrior in the Valkyrie Corps, saw this tragic scene and finally became disheartened. If Odin had not finally intervened, sealed the goddess of death Hela and exiled him. I'm afraid this war can never be stopped, and, fortunately, Nash is Odin's peak strength, and even his throne is being challenged by Hela. Of course, he possesses powerful strength, which is enough to challenge the kingship. Wake up! Everyone discovered that he had arrived in the interior of the distant planet Sakaar. And here, after the explanation of artificial intelligence, he realized that the owner here is none other than the legendary Gaotianzun of the cosmic level. Gaotianzun is even more revered as the universe-level collector. Among his collections are warriors of special races. There are also some special cosmic items. Certainly, the Gaotianzun in front of him likes the dual arena built on Sokka Star the most, using the battles between different races to earn money for himself. And looking at the sturdy Thor in front of him, Gaotianzun is very satisfied. At least in his opinion, this would be a good duelist, but whether he could survive, that's entirely up to the individual. But I didn't think. Saul is not satisfied with the status quo. Then, Gaotianzun pulled out one of the collectors and, as an example to scare the monkeys, the latter turned into ashes and died in front of Thor. At last, it turned into a pool of useless liquid. This scene is so cruel. Although Thor looked calm on the surface, his heart was already beating wildly. He finally accepted his fate. And while looking around, suddenly, I saw a familiar figure sitting in the crowd and chatting. That familiar wizard robe, a wizard outfit. Loki! Thor shouted in surprise. Loki was also confused. He didn't expect to see Thor here. But I didn't expect that. When the two met, there was no normal friendly communication, but rather a hint of quarrel. What are you guys talking about? Gaotianzun was stunned. He looked at the two people in front of him and asked, then he introduced Loki, he calls himself a shocker. Hearing this, God of Thunder. Thor's expression changed slightly. He looked at Gaotianzun beside him and quickly explained with a smile. It's already about reputation. Thor felt even more helpless and looked at Loki beside him. But I didn't think, I don't know him. Loki answered calmly with a smile on his face, looking very polite. This moment. So his sky was no longer tight, and his heart was dead. Oh! When Gaotianzun heard Thor's introduction, an ant-like smile appeared on his face. After all, as the god of thunder, his combat power should be even stronger. His dual arena is the focus of everyone's attention at the moment. If such a character joins, it will surely usher in new highlights. If you want to be free, you must defeat the current champion, and then you can go wherever you want. Gaotianzun surrounded Thor and looked at the sturdy Thor in front of him. He was more and more satisfied. He casually said, if you feel you don't have this ability, you can surrender now and become my slave. Upon hearing this, he's just the champion. I can easily beat him. Thor, who had a bad temper, directly issued a challenge. Then, under the arrangement of the Supreme Lord, Thor met his lifelong enemy. Barber. Stan. Chapter 21. Don't move, my hands aren't as steady as before. Stan looked at Thor and walked towards him. Stan, wearing red glasses, looks a bit funny. Thor roared angrily, I swear by Odin's beard, if you dare to mess with me, you will surely incur the wrath of Thor, but... Buzz. Stan didn't take these words to heart at all. He reached out and pressed the technology button on his arm. With a ding, the button lights up red. Sniff sniff. Immediately, a series of extremely sharp instruments were ejected from the technology on his arms. It looks like a hair clipper. It looks intimidating. There is no room for negotiation at all. At this moment, Thor immediately backed off. He said weakly, "Please, please, don't cut my hair." Ha ha ha. Stan laughed out loud, although his voice sounded a little hoarse. No no. Seeing Stan getting more and more excited, Thor roared. The hair clipper was getting closer and closer, as if it was going to kill him. Time Management Bureau. Sylvie was speechless. She looked at Loki beside her and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Your brother, he can't be ARD." Her eyes were full of disgust. Hearing this, Loki's eyes lit up. Yes. Yes. You finally found it. Actually, I noticed a long time ago that you two look a bit alike. Sylvie folded her arms and retorted mercilessly. Loki was silent. Looking at the sacred timeline in front of him, which was still branching out, he had already confirmed it in his heart. What he was about to do was just how much he wished time would slow down a little bit. At least he can stay with me for a little longer. Sylvie. Moreover, watching the video in front of him was full of memories, even though he had not experienced those things, but watching the bond between him and Thor. As well as his hometown Asgard. And all the stupid things he did when he was king, and all the efforts and redemption he made along the way. At this moment, it seems that they are no longer the factors that bother him. Asgard. Oh. All the soldiers saw the sharp hair clipper and their eyes widened. In Asgard, every warrior has long golden hair, strong and flowing. The scars on their bodies are a symbol of honor for everyone, because they have experienced countless battles. Moreover, they admire primitive force the most, so their hair is also a symbol of their fighting power. That evil hair clipper is our lifelong enemy. No, Thor. No, don't let him cut your hair off. Thor, hold on, you must hold on. All the soldiers watched the video in front of them. They put their hands together next to their mouths and shouted angrily, trying to cheer for Thor. All the women were speechless when they saw this scene. After all, they don't understand the affairs of grown men. It just sounds so weird that they become enemies for life just because of a haircut. Then they have beautiful hair, that wouldn't turn into hell on earth. One of the female warriors made a paw sound, not appreciating these difficult tasks at all. Where was the so-called glory? Earth. Stark building. No. No. The evil hair clipper, stay away from me. Watching the hair clipper approaching him in the video, an old man Stanley laughed gagey. At this moment, Thor clenched his fists, his whole body was exerting force and his muscles were shaking. It seems like great pain. All the Avengers looked at Thor with strange expressions. Iron Man did not even try to hide the silence in his eyes. It's just a haircut, how can it be so painful? Hair doesn't have any nerve endings connected to it. Dr. Banner immediately raised his hand and said, I can attest to this, getting a haircut is not that painful. Hawkeye was speechless. He picked up the wine glass on the table and took a sip. Black Widow changed her sitting position and took a sip of wine. Being with this group of people, she was neither neurasthenic nor extremely painful. But, as the heroine, she exudes a unique charm no matter where she is, and this moment is no exception. S.H.I.E.L.D. Puff. Loki couldn't hold back any longer after seeing this scene and burst out laughing. In Asgard, hair is an important part of every warrior's appearance. If a mighty warrior loses his hair, it is as good as being half dead. Although I am trapped in this cage, but, watching the video in front of me, it doesn't seem so boring anymore, but... Loki looked down at his hands. He was waiting to see what punishment Odin, the king of gods, would pronounce on him when he returned to Asgard in the future. And it was because he was trapped in the cage that he missed his mother's funeral. It was precisely because of my naivety and immaturity that I contradicted Odin and received such a severe punishment. Perhaps, as a bystander, he can see more clearly. The mistakes he made were not at the same level as the mistakes Thor had made before. He despises the weakness of life, he enslaves humans at will, and he brings war wherever he goes. For what he did, the law of Asgard was enough to put him to death, but Odin only imprisoned him. And Odin is a man of his word, and every word he says is like a law. But Queen Fricka, I can still visit him in the cage through magic phantoms. I brought him books and talked with him, and he never felt lonely. Until that fateful day has arrived. But this time, no. Mother, I will not choose to lose you again. Loki's eyes became stubborn, never. In the video, next moment, Thor, with short hair, was pushed out. At this moment, he had lost his long golden hair that he was so proud of, leaving only short golden hair, looking a little pitiful. A red line was randomly drawn on his face, as if to identify him. The next moment. Here, you can choose the weapons you want to use. Gao Tianzun, who was standing on the high platform, moved his hand casually. The blue energy barrier in the distance opened, revealing the various weapons placed inside. And Loki, who had pretended not to know him before, sat next to Gao Tianzun, looking like an honored guest. All right. Looking at this scene, Thor was speechless. But, looking at the duel arena in front of him, he felt a little disdainful in his heart. It would be easy to defeat the so-called champion gladiator here. After all, he is the most powerful warrior in Asgard. Oh, once. He quickly selected his equipment, put on his helmet, and put on the armor he wore when he came here. But at this moment, this set of armor has already belonged to Gao Tianzun. With a shield in hand and a sword behind his back. Fully armed. Boom. The door to the dueling arena slowly opened, and he walked into the arena, facing an extremely wide platform. Both sides of the platform were filled with densely packed seats, just like a stadium, and at this moment the seats were full of people. Roar! Someone roared with excitement when he saw Thor, who looked like a baby bird. Chapter 22. Thor, who had never experienced such a scene before, was unable to adapt for a while. Especially, the thought of Loki sitting on the stage watching this fight. And he, like a joker, was thrown into the middle of the field, and a duel-style battle was about to take place. He was speechless. Although I have tried my best not to think about my hair, I still can't help feeling sad when I think about it. And if Odin saw him in his current state, he would definitely mock him for being ugly. Finally, let us welcome the champion who has won 7 consecutive titles. Gao Tianzun on the high platform stood up and shouted. He had just raised his wine glass. Roar! The whole audience once again erupted in unimaginable roars of shock. And soon, crunch! The gate opposite the duel arena slowly opened with a sound that made people feel gnashing. Snort! Thor's mouth curled up slightly, he didn't care at all. After all, in his eyes, those present were just some special races. How powerful could the so-called dual-style strength be? Finally, the figure behind the door revealed itself. He was dressed like an ancient Roman warrior, and his huge body was like a giant. The color on it, green. Thor was stunned and looked up again. Hulk. His entire look changed from confusion to surprise and excitement in an instant. Yes. He clenched his fists excitedly and almost jumped up. But, Loki, who was sitting next to Gao Tianzun, widened his eyes when he saw this scene. He stood up in disbelief. No. No, I want to leave here. Looking at Hulk standing in the field, the most terrifying memories immediately emerged in his mind. After being severely beaten by Hulk, the fear of Hulk was already left in his heart. Gao Tianzun, who was sitting there, had a confused look on his face, not understanding what Loki was doing. All the audience watched this scene, feeling thrilled and excited. They didn't know what would happen to this weak humanoid creature next, getting beaten by the green monster on the opposite side. After all, the green giant on the opposite side is simply too powerful. He has fought so many battles and has never lost a single one. Such an exciting battle is full of gimmicks and also attracted more audiences. They were all there for this hardy battle. Look at this green giant in front of you. Can he once again display his incomparably powerful fighting power? But, in Loki's eyes, this was clearly a terrifying death warrant. Earth. Stark building. Just now everyone looked at Thor in confusion, and now everyone looked at Banner in confusion. Dr. Banner, are you sure you don't have a twin brother? Iron Man said jokingly. Hawkeye also looked over and put down the wine glass in his hand. After all, there can't be such a coincidence in the world. Why would Hulk appear on the so-called planet Sada? Black Widow also looked over. She pouted slightly and looked confused. Captain America also looked over. He had a good impression of Dr. Banner. As for the Hulk, he is simply a monster whose fighting power becomes more terrifying the angrier he gets. But fortunately, because of the existence of the Hulk, during the Battle of New York, he was able to save Iron Man who fell from the black hole. Now it seems very likely that this is not a coincidence. No. Dr. Banner immediately shook his head, stretched out his hands and looked at everyone, but it looks like it's really Hulk. This time, everyone was silenced. Now. In the universe. In a void of emptiness, the towering stones formed a throne, and the darkness below seemed to hide corpses everywhere. At this moment, a giant covered in purple was sitting majestically on the throne. In his hand he held a broadsword of exaggerated shape. This broadsword, the blades on both sides are only sharp in the middle of the handle. The terrifying blade exudes a cold light. To use this broadsword requires at least unimaginable strength. Otherwise, it would be hard to even lift it. Not to mention wielding this sword. But even such a terrifying broadsword seemed like just a plastic toy when held in the hand of this purple giant. He reached out and picked up the sand and stone, gently polishing the white edge, emitting sparks. And beside him stood respectfully, the servant who looked dry, an elegant outfit, with some golden lines on the clothes, and a pair of wise eyes. It seems to emit a cold light at every moment. Ebony Maw. It seems the gem we want is on Earth, the Tesseract. Thanos spoke calmly, yes. Ebony Maw respectfully placed his hand on his chest and bowed gently. Loyal. Just like a puppy. He looked at Thanos in front of him and asked cautiously, when do we set off? Don't worry. I want to see what kind of power is hidden behind this video. Are there any clues to other gems? Thanos shook his head nonchalantly, multi-universe, what a wonderful word. He still held the sand in his hand, sharpening the broadsword. At this moment, his eyes were sharp. After all, the video revealed more than just a little bit. In the video, when Thor saw the Hulk, he was so excited that he almost dug 2 miles on the spot. And the next moment, he looked at Hulk with enthusiasm, Hulk. It's me. In the video, Thor, for some unknown reason, tentatively stretched out his hands in front of Hulk. A sly smile appeared on his face. Asgard. Even Queen Fricka's eyes were full of disgust when she saw it. The others were even more speechless. Is this still the same Thor from before? In the video, the High Lord on the high platform didn't know what the warriors on the field were doing. He frowned slightly. Loki beside him didn't dare to act rashly, as he was ready to escape at any time. At this moment, with the whole audience watching, everyone was looking forward to the next battle, but at this moment there was complete silence. Everyone's face was filled with confusion. Hulk also looked at Thor in front of him. He was not as angry as before, but now he seemed to be indifferent to everything. Just like a real strong warrior, he despises everything, that kind of indifference, calmness, fearlessness. He also saw the sly smile on Thor's face, and the hand that was held out to him. He looked at Thor in front of him again. The smile on Thor's face grew wider, as if he felt the success of his plan. After all, with the power of hospitality, he wanted to escape from here, simply. Hulk grabbed his hand just as he expected. Feeling the solidity in his palms, Thor felt much more at ease at this moment. But, next moment, Hulk grabbed Thor's hand, and then, like holding a doll, smashed it directly beside him. Pa pa pa. He was like a madman, swinging Thor back and forth and slamming him to the ground. The ground was smashed into countless pieces with a loud explosion, and rocks flew everywhere, and soon a small pit appeared. He was like a ruthless smashing machine, and even paused to check Thor's condition. Then, pa pa pa. There was another round of smashing, and then, with a bang, Thor was dropped into the pit. Chapter 23. And at this time, Thor was lying in the pit, with the same expression as Loki had at the beginning. Both painful and helpless. But I didn't think, just then, yet. That's it. Loki, who was sitting next to Gao Tianzun, stood up and shouted angrily. At this moment, he was so excited that he almost fainted. A high-pitched voice sounded, and the expression was extremely happy. Beside, Gao Tianzun looked at him as if he was looking at a mentally retarded person. Looking at Loki beside him, he looked completely bewildered. I love this kind of game. Loki introduced himself to Gao Tianzun with a smile from the bottom of his heart on his face. After the interlude, Saul got down to business. Even though he was beaten up by Hulk, he still managed to get to the place where Hulk was resting. And it was here that he saw Dr. Banner, who had transformed into a human form again. After some persuasion, Dr. Banner agreed to return to Asgard with Thor. And their first step is to escape. Then, they escaped. The other side. The High Lord summoned Loki and Valkyrie. The army has been assembled and they are required to capture Thor and Banner as soon as possible. The crowd set out quickly, unexpectedly. In an unexpected battle, Loki discovered that the Valkyrie had the mark of the Valkyrie Legion on her body. She is also from Asgard. And, according to previous records, the former Valkyrie Corps was annihilated in the process of fighting Hela. And then it disappeared. But I didn't think. The Valkyrie in front of him turned out to be the only one left in the Valkyrie army. Then, snap! Loki's big hand directly covered Valkyrie's forehead, and the power of magic pushed Valkyrie's memory. It directly reproduces the tragic scene that emerged when fighting the goddess of death Hela. Originally, Loki just wanted to activate the Valkyrie's fighting spirit and let her return to Asgard. This magic can arouse the most sincere memories in people's hearts, and he did succeed. In the memory of the Valkyrie, he saw the soaring war horses in the sky and countless Valkyries. A powerful army was formed. They were all powerful warriors of Asgard, but in that battle, they were all killed or wounded. There is no hope of victory in this fierce battle. Hela's power comes from Asgard. As long as she stays in the divine realm, her power is limitless, and she possesses the regenerative healing factor, so are her magical powers. Watching her teammates fall down and die one by one, she finally lost hope. Unexpectedly. After Valkyrie woke up, she immediately launched a series of combos. He tied up Loki without hesitation. Then, Thor appears, bringing with him Dr. Banner, who is wearing a suit. When they saw Loki for the first time, everyone picked up the drink bottles next to them and smashed them on Loki's head. This is a way to test the truth. After all, in the past, Loki would use illusions. Looking at Thor in front of him, Valkyrie finally agreed to return to Asgard. Team formation. The first task is to escape from the Sakaar planet in front of us. Although several people do not trust Loki, they have to use Loki's power when they return to Asgard. So, the troops were divided into two groups. Thor and Loki had a great teamwork. After all, a spaceship was stolen from a group of confused soldiers. Just as the spacecraft was about to take off, Loki was clever and created a magic duplication. This time, Thor, who had been stupid for who knows how long, finally wised up and took off the controller from his neck. He had already attached it to Loki's back without knowing when. Loki was confused. Looking at Loki in front of him, Thor smiled and pressed the button. One moment, snap! Huge amounts of electric current passed through, and Loki, who was full of energy before, now lay on the ground like a dead pig. But so he finally decided to leave Loki here. After all, he was well aware of the dangers of Asgard. This battle may not be winnable, but everyone is determined to return to Asgard. Asgard needs to be defended. Hela's strength, it was hard to imagine, and he had no idea if he could survive this battle. Although with Hulk, but everything is unknown. The spacecraft takes off, the destination is Asgard. The plan is half done. And at this moment, Loki, who was lying on the ground, was also discovered by the stone man Korg. After recovering, Loki looked at Korg in front of him. Under his persuasion, the group also joined the journey back to Asgard. On the other side, there is no doubt that Hela is so powerful that even Thor has no chance of winning. In Hela's eyes, Thor is not her brother, but just a subject of Asgard. She is born strong, she is the most powerful warrior in Asgard, and she has expanded the territory for Asgard. Odin's throne should have belonged to her. At this time, Odin is not here either, and there is no one who can stop her from ruling Asgard. Then, she beat Thor half to death and even blinded one of his eyes. Thor lost his hammer. There is not much fighting power at all. And at this moment, I'm back. An unexpected surprise that no one expected, Loki actually came back with an enormous spaceship, and this enormous spaceship was big enough to accommodate everyone. Then, Loki is responsible for stopping Hela and fighting alongside Thor. On the other side, Heimdall, dressed in rags and linen, was responsible for taking all the remaining Asgardians onto the refuge ship. But, just then, on the Rainbow Bridge, a giant wolf was walking towards this side from far away, with a fierce light in its eyes, sharp fangs, and scarlet pupils. Now, everyone was in a panic, unable to get past the giant wolf and onto the refugee ship. And the people behind him were also retreating step by step. Then, looking at the Valkyrie on the spaceship, Dr. Banner made up his mind and said, "You should know my. In front of us is the giant wolf Fenrir, who was resurrected by Hela using the eternal fire." Valkyrie looked at Dr. Banner with an expression like an idiot. She was completely confused and had no idea what this man was talking about. "All right." Banner smiled, "You will know soon." Then, he looked down. The giant wolf Fenrir, who was standing in front of all the civilians, looked at the distance between the spaceship and the Rainbow Bridge. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down. Then, he jumped up and suddenly fell to the ground from the air. Then, in full view of everyone, he fell directly onto the Rainbow Bridge with a thud. And Hulk didn't show up either. Banner had broken bones all over his body and his cheek was smashed. One moment. The giant wolf Fenrir was stunned. He didn't know whether he should move forward or not. He didn't know if the human in front of him had a problem with his brain. Opposite. All the remaining Asgard people were also stunned at this moment. They looked on in disbelief. Banner smashed into a puddle on the ground. The Guardian, Heimdall, who was wearing rags and sackcloth, had a look of shock on his face. This person, what can I compare him to? Chapter 24. Earth. Stark Building. Pa. 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 Everyone held their foreheads and covered their eyes at the same time. This is simply unbearable to watch. So scary. How could you do such a thing? Hawkeye was stunned. Iron Man couldn't help but say, falling to death in front of everyone, "Are you trying to scare the enemy to death?" Well, Dr. Banner didn't know how to explain it. He can indeed do such an embarrassing thing, but Hulk didn't show up. That's weird. Camartage. Oh. When Doctor Strange saw this scene, he couldn't help but close his eyes. This is so embarrassing. This is so embarrassing. Withered Town. Wanda unexpectedly wanted to laugh when she saw this scene. The emotions that have been suppressed for such a long time seem. Just a little more stuff. Guardians of the Galaxy. Rocket Raccoon scratched his head, and then he saw Star-Lord beside him. What kind of person is this? Groot. Groot's eyes revealed wisdom. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. The Destroyer laughed even harder. Ahem. Gamora took a sip of water to hide her embarrassment. Probably. Star-Lord was also speechless at this moment. Video continues. The following battle was not smooth sailing. In order to ensure that all refugees can board the ship safely, at this moment, Thor, Loki, and Valkyrie all stood in front of Hela. At this moment, Thor regained his power. Because when he was beaten by Hela and couldn't take care of himself, in his mind, Odin appears. "Father, I can't do it." Thor looked at Odin in front of him, his eyes full of desire. After all, Odin has always been there to protect him, so he doesn't need to be at the forefront, but he taught himself to be a warrior. Thor's hammer has been broken. My current strength is not enough to defeat Hela. His eyes were full of those directed at his old father. I want my dad's help. But at this moment, Odin in his mind asked coldly with a cold face, "Are you the god of hammer or Thor? Without the hammer, you are nothing." One moment. Thor's heart seemed to be opened up. Brush. He opened his eyes instantly, even in the blind pupils, there was a flash of lightning, boom. With one blow, Hela, who was pressing on him, was directly knocked away. At this moment, taking advantage of the brief interval, he also said to Loki, "If you want to defeat the waves, you need to get the crown of Flame Giant from the treasure house. You only have one chance." After saying this, he rushed forward again and fought with Hela without saying anything else. Now that Thor has regained his power, his fighting power is equally strong. Although he is still no match for Hela, but with the help of the Valkyrie, he can temporarily hold the opponent back. Good. Looking at the fighting Thor, Loki was unusually calm at this moment for some reason. Green magic enveloped his entire body, and along with it, his figure disappeared from the spot. When it appears again, his figure had arrived at a place that looked extremely empty. Here. This is the hidden treasure house in the Hall of Heroes. You can even see the figure of a destroyed mecha. It is also Odin's collection treasure house. Here are spoils of war from defeating enemies, as well as treasures collected by Odin. The green eternal flame keeps burning, and the eternal flame will never go out. This is from Flame Giant. Thor once went out to fight, and because he lost the eternal flame, the Flame Giant's strength was only 1/10 of what it was. Therefore, he has a chance to defeat Flame Giant and take the crown of Flame Giant. And now, as long as you throw the crown back into the eternal fire, the Flame Giant will be revived. Soon. At the deepest part of the treasury, Loki finally found the key item of this trip. The crown of Flame Giant. There are some other things on display here. Suddenly, Loki saw a familiar blue square. Tesseract. He hesitated for a moment, then took the tesseract in his hand, and then negotiate the way Saul does. The weak flame finally flickered gently, agreeing with Thor's opinion. Then Loki took a deep breath. Throw the crown of Flame Giant into the eternal fire. Now. Thor fought with the determination to die. But, after awakening the power of Thor, Thor's combat power has been greatly improved. It is no longer easy for Hela to defeat Thor. For a moment, he was unable to completely kill Thor, and for a moment he felt extremely annoyed. But at this moment, Hela's face changed drastically. She suddenly turned her head and looked in the direction of the temple, because, in her powerful perception, she clearly felt that something was awakening deep in the temple. That terrifying power. An unimaginable thrill. Opposite, success. Thor, who also felt this energy, smiled slightly. Although, he had already thought of the consequences of doing so, which was Ragnarok and the destruction of Asgard, but as long as the people of Asgard behind him are still alive, Asgard will still exist no matter where he goes. There is a home only when there are people. This was Odin's last message to him. At this moment, the remaining people of Asgard have already boarded the refugee ships, and there are only a few left. And at this moment, brother Loki appeared beside Thor and asked seriously, "Do you know what the consequences of doing this will be?" "No." At this moment, Thor's face was firm, but this is the only way. His face was resolute, without the slightest hesitation or regret. "Okay. I respect your decision." Loki was relieved at this moment. "What did you guys do?" At this moment, Hela finally realized that something was wrong, and she shouted angrily. Finally, roar! A roar resounded between heaven and earth. The next moment, encountering an unimaginable giant, suddenly standing between heaven and earth, his body seemed to be made of flames, huge bones, a crown of flames on the head. Base. Pulling out a huge sword several hundred meters long, he stood majestically between heaven and earth. With a casual sword, he slashed at the distant building. Boom! Ordinary buildings could not withstand such terrifying force and were chopped to pieces in an instant. Seeing this scene, go, go, go! Thor's expression changed slightly. The flame giant in front of him integrated the eternal flame. His strength will be enhanced unimaginably. Even the former god King Odin could not directly fight against such an existence. This is the most feared existence of all gods. Nowadays, he has regained all his strength, and still holds hatred for Asgard and his promise to Thor. The first thing to do is destroy Asgard. Ending Ragnarok. Chapter 25. Instead of letting Hela destroy Asgard, it is better to use the power of the flame giant. Destroy Asgard and completely eliminate the source of Hela's power. This is the only way. Boom! Under the terrifying power of the flame giant, the entire Asgard was destroyed at will like a toy. Buildings collapsed everywhere, and the entire Asgard was burning in fire. No! Feeling the power draining away from her body, Hela couldn't help but burst into anger. Once Asgard is completely destroyed, she will also lose the source of her power. By then, life and death can be imagined. But suddenly, brush! A huge sword stabbed down from above his head. Thor, sitting on the spaceship, watched this scene. Why? He sighed and finally withdrew his gaze. At this moment, as long as the Asgardians still existed, Asgard would not be destroyed. But if Hela enslaves the people of Asgard, all that will be left for Asgard is war and destruction. Loki seemed to be thinking about something, and reached out to pat Thor's shoulder. Even the Valkyrie who once looked down upon Loki the most, rarely said anything. Behind all the Asgardians showed fear on their faces, and the girl huddled in her mother's arms. Although they have a strong divine physique, but in the final analysis, they are not much different from humans. There is birth, aging, sickness and death, there is right and wrong, and there are 7 emotions and 6 desires. At this moment, Thor stood in front of everyone. I will take you to a safe place. Hearing this, everyone looked at Thor. The gaze at this moment, the attention he got from everyone made him realize what a king should do. It made him realize what Odin once said about duty, growth and responsibility, what exactly was the meaning. As expected, he sat on the throne that belonged to the king. And Loki, standing beside him, the look he gave Thor was full of respect, without even a hint of the previous envy. The spaceship left Asgard and quickly traveled into the universe. And it was not until this moment that everyone finally let go of their worries. In Hela's hands, no one can survive. Although Asgard is gone now, at least all the people are still there. Until this time, Thor and Loki finally relaxed. Actually, brother, I find that you are not as bad as I thought. Thor looked at Loki. In his eyes, was a smile of relief. Loki pursed his lips. What I want to say is self-evident. Asgard. Watching the destroyed Asgard in the video, everyone was shocked. This is S.H.I.E.L.D, I don't know how many years of Asgard, which had fought countless battles among the 9 kingdoms, had existed for who knows how long. Destroyed. Queen Fricka also looked helpless. Fortunately, Thor finally showed his wit at the last moment. The 2 brothers put aside their past grudges and fought together, thus saving countless people of Asgard. Queen Fricka was lying on a chair, her face showing a trace of fatigue. Nowadays, during the time when Odin was asleep, she could not lead Asgard to prosperity, but at least she could make the people in front of her live in peace. This has already made her use all her skills. Suddenly, Fricka. A big hand was placed on the queen's shoulder. This hand is dry and strong, but also has wrinkles due to old age. Fricka suddenly looked up. Odin, wearing a golden helmet, seemed to be a little older, but he finally woke up. You're awake? She said in surprise. Yeah, Asgard has been destroyed. What will I do if I don't wake up? Odin looked at the video unhappily. And below. Because of Odin's arrival, the hearts of all his subjects were no longer as heavy as before. This is the backbone, the king of Asgard. Video continues. At this moment when everyone was briefly settled on the boat, outside the spacecraft, buzz. Suddenly, a huge monster appeared from invisibility, the size of a terrifying spaceship. The spaceship that Loki brought back from Sakaar looks like a toy in front of this giant. Pa pa pa. Countless lights turned on, and the spaceship full of Asgard subjects was directly locked in front of them. And right there, on the deck of another spaceship, the sturdy figure of a purple giant appeared in front of everyone. He put his hands behind his back and looked calmly at the small spaceship in front of him. Beside Ebony Maw stood there like a butler, a loyal servant. On the refugee boat, Thor's face changed drastically. Base. Loki also showed the dagger in his hand. At this moment, the situation began to become critical. The battle scene that everyone wanted to see did not appear. The screen flashes. The ground was already filled with countless corpses, like ants, dead everywhere. Apparently, they are the Asgard subjects who were descended from the refugees before. As the camera moves, Thor, who was previously recognized by all Asgard people, now had a bloody face in his head. Just like that, he was held in the palm of Thanos' hand. The powerful Thor is more like a large toy at this moment. In front of Thanos, he is no match at all. Opposite. Loki's face was also covered with scars. But, the next moment, hand over the Tesseract, or Thanos said calmly. At this moment, he pressed one of the gems in the golden glove on his right hand against Thor's temple. Pa! The power gem, the terrifying power burst out directly in this piece in an unimaginable way. Without any obstruction, he poured energy into Thor's head. Ah! Thor roared in pain, unable to resist the pain. This expression, at this moment, he is facing a life and death situation. Okay, I'll give it to you. Loki couldn't bear it any longer. He stretched out his right hand, blue magic flashed, and the Tesseract suddenly appeared in his hand. He walked towards Thanos step by step. Thor's eyes were fixed on Loki. He doesn't want to compromise. But suddenly, don't forget, we still have. Loki suddenly looked at Thor. Hulk. Pa. He threw away the Tesseract in his hand. He hugged Thor, and rolled to the side. Roar! In the distance, the sound of rage was heard, and a huge amount of green giant rushed over from a distance, punching Thanos with his fist holding a sandbag. Before Thanos could react, he was pushed out. Loki helped Thor up, and the two looked into the distance where Thanos and Hulk were fighting. At least the fighting power of both of them is not as good as Hulk. In Loki's eyes, there is no Thanos that cannot be dealt with if Hulk takes action. Thor also looked at the battle scene. At the moment, he was seriously injured and didn't even have the strength to stand up. Covered in blood, it is hard to imagine what kind of battle he just went through. Finally, a quarter of an hour later, Thanos carried the half-dead Hulk on his back and walked out step by step, throwing away the Hulk as if he was throwing away garbage. Thrown in front of Loki and Thor. At this moment, Loki and Thor were both stunned. Hulk! We were defeated. This purple giant in front of me has such terrifying fighting power. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you are notified of future uploads. You can find the next parts in the playlist visible on the screen or on my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.